Real Nickle News, where we are discussing harsh realities that often go ignored. Sit back, plays us in the background, because this is a doozy. Remember to like and subscribe.
Have you ever wondered why some of the smartest people you know struggle to make ends meet, while others, far less intelligent, seem to effortlessly glide through life, cushioned by wealth? The harsh reality is that our world doesn't prioritize intelligence, talent, or merit nearly as much as it prioritizes money. Think about education. Intelligence should open doors, right? But from the earliest stages, it's wealth, not ability, that determines your starting line. The child born into privilege doesn't just receive better resources or more qualified teachers. They inherit connections, opportunities, and an early boost in a race that many never even get to enter. Intelligence, meanwhile, is often trapped, struggling just to be recognized. Schools in affluent neighborhoods receive more funding, attract better teachers, and offer extensive extracurricular programs. Wealth buys private tutoring, specialized test preparation, and prestigious internships. Meanwhile, bright students from poorer backgrounds are left fighting for the bare essentials. Intelligence, raw potential, brilliance, these are all secondary if there isn't money backing them up. The workplace isn't much different. We love to believe that brains and hard work automatically equal success. Yet, look around. Promotions, raises, even opportunities to lead, often these go to those who navigate office politics or who come from backgrounds where networking and influence were as natural as breathing. Intelligence alone rarely cuts through this noise. Consider the reality of internships and entry-level jobs. Who can afford to spend months working unpaid, gaining crucial experience? Certainly not the talented individual who needs to pay bills, support family, or simply survive. Instead, these opportunities frequently go to those who have financial safety nets, whose intelligence or ability may be mediocre, but whose bank accounts speak volumes. And then there's innovation. Our culture romanticizes the genius inventor, the lone visionary whose brilliant mind changes the world. But what's the unspoken truth behind every great innovation? Money? Without funding? Without investors willing to take risks, even the most brilliant ideas suffocate in silence. Genius needs capital to speak, to act, to matter. Think of all the brilliant ideas you've never heard about because they lacked initial funding. Innovations in medicine, technology, sustainability, all potentially transformative, yet overlooked because investors saw quicker profits elsewhere. Meanwhile, less revolutionary ideas, backed by substantial capital, thrive simply due to financial backing, dominating markets, not because they're better, but because they're wealthier. In society itself, wealth doesn't just open doors, it writes the rules. Laws, policies, entire systems bend around money. Intelligence can identify injustice, highlight flaws, scream for change, but without financial leverage, it's just a voice lost in the wind. Money shapes society's future far more decisively than ideas ever could. Consider politics, the arena where decisions affecting millions are made. Who truly holds power? It's rarely the most intelligent or the most ethical. It's the richest. Campaigns run on money. Policies are influenced by lobbyists with deep pockets. The intelligent citizen, without financial backing, watches from the sidelines, their brilliance overshadowed by the brute force of wealth. Media, too, is dominated by financial power. Ideas gain traction, not because they're inherently valuable, but because someone with enough money decides they're worth attention. Intelligent, thoughtful commentary can easily be drowned out by louder, wealthier voices capable of buying airtime, manipulating public perception, and shaping narratives. Why is this disturbing? because it reveals a truth we've long tried to ignore. Our world is not built to reward merit or intellect, but wealth. Intelligence isn't irrelevant, it's simply secondary. Money doesn't just talk, it shouts louder, commands attention, and silences opposition. Recognizing this doesn't mean accepting defeat, but it means understanding the real rules of the game. Intelligence matters, but without money, its influence is painfully limited. If you've ever wondered why the world seems unfair, unequal, tilted heavily toward the wealthy, it's because it is. Yet, despite knowing this, we cling to myths that intelligence alone can break through barriers. We teach children to believe that good grades and smart ideas guarantee success. We perpetuate this narrative because acknowledging the overwhelming power of money is uncomfortable. It confronts us with an unsettling truth: meritocracy, the comforting idea that talent and hard work are the keys to success, is largely an illusion. But this isn't simply a bleak indictment, it's a necessary awareness. The more clearly we see the game, the better equipped we are to navigate it, challenge it, and maybe even change it. Wealth may dominate, but awareness is power. Recognizing how deeply money shapes our lives, our opportunities, and our society is the first step toward demanding a world where intelligence and merit genuinely matter. The world doesn't celebrate genius. It celebrates what it always has: power, influence, and above all, money. Have you ever noticed how often genuinely good people find themselves caught up in situations they never intended to be in, silenced, manipulated, or subtly controlled? It's unsettling to acknowledge. But the disturbing truth is that the kindness, empathy, and moral compass of good people often become their greatest vulnerabilities. Think about the qualities we associate with being good: compassion, empathy, generosity, a strong sense of duty. These virtues make societies thrive, communities flourish, and relationships meaningful. But they also create openings for manipulation. Why? Because manipulators thrive on trust. They exploit our best instincts, knowing precisely how to twist kindness into compliance. Take guilt, for example, one of the simplest yet most powerful tools of control. Good people naturally feel responsible for the well-being of others. When told their actions or lack thereof hurt someone, they reflexively internalize blame. Manipulators recognize this. They weaponize guilt, carefully turning acts of kindness into obligations and generosity into debt. Consider the subtle power dynamics in friendships, relationships, or even workplaces. Someone consistently goes above and beyond, not because they're weak, but precisely because they are good. They take on extra tasks, stay late, or sacrifice their own needs. Slowly, without realizing, their kindness shifts into expectation. Once generosity is normalized, it stops being appreciated and starts being demanded. Soon a good person finds themselves trapped by their own decency, guilted into maintaining behaviors that slowly erode their autonomy. Another vulnerability: empathy. Good people instinctively imagine themselves in the position of others, feeling their pain, understanding their struggles. This trait, essential for building trust and meaningful connections, also becomes a double-edged sword. Empathy makes it difficult to set boundaries because setting boundaries can feel harsh, even cruel. Manipulators exploit empathy by constantly presenting themselves as victims, needing rescue, assistance, or special consideration. Think about the parent who uses their child's empathy against them, the partner who constantly needs emotional reassurance, or the friend who relies excessively on emotional labor without reciprocation. Empathy, intended to build connections, becomes a leash, subtly controlling good people through the fear of being labeled selfish or unkind. Then there's the need for approval. and the fear of conflict. Good people often prioritize harmony. Conflict feels uncomfortable, hostile even, so they learn to avoid confrontation. Manipulators exploit this avoidance. They create environments where any disagreement is labeled disruptive or toxic. Slowly, good people become silent, compliant, sacrificing their true thoughts and feelings for the illusion of peace. And it doesn't stop at personal relationships. Societal systems themselves rely on the compliance of good people. Governments, institutions, and corporations frequently appeal to civic duty, collective responsibility, and moral obligation to maintain control. Good citizens comply because they genuinely care about community, justice, and stability. But their goodness makes them less likely to question motives, challenge narratives, or demand transparency. They are obedient, not through coercion, but conviction. Even the language of morality is weaponized. Good people don't complain. Good citizens don't disrupt. Good employees don't question. Such narratives subtly condition people to associate virtue with silence and obedience. To question authority or demand fairness becomes equated with selfishness, rebellion, or troublemaking. So why is recognizing this disturbing? Because it shatters the comforting illusion that goodness always leads to happiness or fairness. It reveals that society's moral structure, far from protecting good people, often leaves them vulnerable to manipulation. It challenges the reassuring notion that kindness, empathy, and generosity are always rewarded. In reality, they're frequently exploited. Yet, understanding this doesn't mean abandoning goodness or virtue. Instead, it calls for an essential shift. Good people must learn to recognize manipulation, set firm boundaries, and understand that true kindness sometimes means protecting themselves. Goodness doesn't have to equate to vulnerability. Awareness and strength must accompany compassion. Being good is admirable, essential even, but being good and aware is powerful. It's not enough to merely be virtuous. Good people must also be vigilant, ready to identify when their virtues are being twisted into tools of control. Only then can kindness remain what it was always meant to be, a strength, not a weakness. Have you ever stopped to wonder why you're always tired, not just physically tired after a long day, but mentally and emotionally exhausted in a way sleep never fully cures? This isn't an accident. It's not your fault, nor is it a sign of personal weakness. It's something deeper, intentional, and more insidious. The system itself thrives on your exhaustion. Look around. From the moment you wake, you're bombarded by a never-ending stream of demands, distractions, and obligations. Notifications scream for attention. Work tasks pile up endlessly, bills demand payment, and social pressures never let you pause. The world moves fast, deliberately too fast. Because when you're tired, truly worn down, you're less likely to question, less likely to resist, and more likely to accept whatever reality you're handed. Exhaustion isn't just an inconvenience, it's a powerful tool of control. When you're constantly overwhelmed, your ability to critically think or challenge authority diminishes. It's not that you're incapable, it's simply that you lack the energy to engage. Fatigue makes it difficult to think clearly, easier to accept simple answers, comforting lies, and shallow distractions. It turns you from an active participant into a passive observer, quietly accepting rather than actively shaping your life. Consider your typical workday. Most modern workplaces emphasize productivity above all else. You're rewarded not for efficiency, but for endurance, the ability to handle more work, more pressure, more stress. The mythical hustle culture glorifies exhaustion as a badge of honor. You're subtly trained to associate being overwhelmed with importance, dedication, and success. But ask yourself who truly benefits from this relentless pursuit. Certainly not you. Productivity has soared over the last decades, yet wages stagnate, benefits dwindle, and job security vanishes. The system extracts value from your exhaustion, channeling your effort upwards while leaving you depleted. And the cruelest part, you're told to be grateful for the privilege of working yourself into the ground. Beyond work, exhaustion is everywhere. The endless scroll of social media isn't designed for your relaxation or genuine connection. It's optimized to keep you emotionally drained, yet compulsively returning for more. Algorithms carefully calibrate your attention, knowing exactly when to deliver dopamine hits, outrage, and anxiety, keeping you in a perpetual state of reactive exhaustion. Then there's consumer culture, built on your fatigue. Exhaustion weakens your self-control and amplifies your desire for quick comforts. After a draining day, resisting impulse buys, unhealthy food, or unnecessary products becomes difficult. Corporations know this. Your exhaustion fuels profits, quietly encouraging you to buy comfort, convenience, and distraction, further embedding you into the cycle of work. Spend, consume, repeat. Politically, exhaustion serves another critical purpose. It suppresses dissent. An exhausted population doesn't protest injustice, demand accountability, or challenge systemic corruption. It's too tired to mobilize, too overwhelmed to organize. Political and economic powers benefit from your exhaustion precisely because it keeps you compliant, quiet, and manageable. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all is how exhaustion isolates you. Relationships suffer when everyone is perpetually tired. Communities weaken as individuals retreat inward, too drained to participate. Isolation makes control easier. If you're disconnected, you're less likely to see the shared struggle, less likely to recognize systemic exploitation, less likely to unite against it. This system of exhaustion thrives because it's invisible, disguised as normal life. You're taught exhaustion is natural, unavoidable, even virtuous. But recognizing this manipulation is the first step towards reclaiming your power. Realize your exhaustion isn't a personal failing. It's a deliberate, calculated outcome of a system designed to exploit it. Breaking free isn't easy. It requires conscious resistance. It means redefining your value beyond productivity. It means resting without guilt, saying no without apology, and rejecting the toxic glamorization of exhaustion. Most importantly, it means understanding that your well-being is revolutionary. The system needs you exhausted, yes, but what it fears most is your awakening. Imagine what would happen if collectively we refused to participate in our own exploitation. Imagine the strength, clarity, and resilience of people no longer exhausted but empowered. The system thrives on your exhaustion. Don't give it the satisfaction. Imagine you're sitting on a plush, comfortable couch. Your favorite show is streaming. A delicious meal sits within arm's reach, and your worries feel distant, muffled by the gentle hum of contentment. Now ask yourself, why would you ever leave? Why question anything at all when comfort feels so good? Comfort isn't just pleasant, it's intoxicating. It soothes anxieties, numbs fears, and gently persuades you to accept things exactly as they are. But here's the unsettling truth. Comfort isn't just relaxation, it's a method of control. It's a velvet-lined trap, silently shaping your thoughts, limiting your actions, and subtly ensuring you stay exactly where the system wants you. Think about the ways society carefully designs comfort to keep you compliant. Your environment is crafted to minimize friction, maximize ease, and condition you to desire convenience above all else. Delivery services, streaming platforms, and smart devices promise effortless living. They seem harmless, even beneficial, but their true function is deeper. The more comfortable you become, the less likely you are to disrupt your own ease by asking uncomfortable questions or pursuing difficult truths. In a world obsessed with comfort, discomfort becomes suspicious. Challenges, risks, and uncertainties start to feel unnatural, even threatening. You're trained to fear disruption, to avoid inconvenience at all costs. Why protest injustice or seek personal growth when staying comfortable is so much simpler? And that's precisely the point. Comfort creates inertia. It keeps you passive, docile, and indifferent. You're less likely to question authority when your basic needs are met and exceeded. Governments, corporations, even social systems understand this implicitly. They provide just enough comfort to keep dissent at bay, ensuring you're satisfied enough not to complain, but never empowered enough to demand more. Consider modern entertainment, endless content, instantly available, meticulously tailored to your preferences. It's comfort so finely tuned that it creates dependency. Hours vanish, scrolling through social media or binge-watching shows, pleasant diversions designed not just to entertain, but to distract. The real world, with its complicated issues and uncomfortable truths, fades away, replaced by an artificial paradise built from pixels and dopamine hits. Your reliance on comfort extends into your professional life as well. The illusion of stability, regular paychecks, predictable routines, and minor workplace perks becomes enough to keep you locked in place. Employers know comfort discourages rebellion. Why risk losing stability to demand better wages, fairer treatment, or more meaningful work when comfort whispers, "This is good enough"? Politically, comfort is even more effective. Comfortable citizens don't question systems or challenge power structures. As long as basic comforts, housing, entertainment, minor luxuries are accessible, public outrage is muted and genuine change stalls. Why fight corruption or inequality if your own personal comfort remains untouched? But comfort doesn't just pacify, it isolates. It turns inward, fostering individual satisfaction over collective progress. Community action feels unnecessary when your personal needs are consistently met. This isolation weakens social bonds, making collective resistance impossible. Comfort becomes your cage, soft, appealing, but still a cage. The insidious nature of comfort is precisely why it's the best form of control. Unlike fear, which provokes immediate resistance, comfort is willingly embraced. You don't fight against it, you seek it out, invest in it, defend it. The chains of comfort feel good, even desirable. Breaking free from them seems irrational. Yet, real growth, both personal and societal, requires discomfort. Change demands disruption, struggle, and risk. Comfort may shield you temporarily, but it also restricts your potential, numbing you to your own power and possibilities. Recognizing this isn't easy. It requires looking critically at your own desires, questioning what you've been conditioned to crave. It demands confronting the fact that true comfort, meaningful comfort, isn't about effortless ease. It's about freedom, autonomy, and authentic self-determination. Comfort, in its truest form, should empower you, not entrap you. Ask yourself, is your comfort making you stronger, wiser, freer, or is it quietly controlling you, ensuring your compliance and limiting your potential? Breaking the spell of comfort doesn't mean embracing endless suffering. It means reclaiming comfort on your terms, comfort that uplifts, strengthens, and genuinely fulfills. Realize that your craving for ease is natural, but allowing it to control you is not. Don't confuse comfort with freedom. They are not the same. One offers temporary relief, the other genuine liberation. Understand the difference, reclaim your autonomy, and redefine comfort in a way that frees you rather than confines you. Let me tell you a story, not about someone else, but about you. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and deciding to face every truth about your life head on. Every insecurity, every unfulfilled dream, every painful compromise. How comfortable would you be? How well would you function? Probably not very, because our world isn't designed to reward honesty. It thrives when you lie to others, sure, but especially to yourself. You're rewarded, subtly but powerfully, every time you look away from uncomfortable truths. Each time you reassure yourself that things are fine when they clearly aren't, the system reinforces your self-deception. Because when you lie to yourself, you remain compliant, productive, and controllable. You become exactly the person society wants you to be, superficially content and deeply unaware. Think about your career. You might reassure yourself daily that your job is fulfilling, even meaningful, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. You pretend the hours spent away from family, the endless stress, and the emotional toll are worth it, because acknowledging otherwise threatens your stability. Corporations reward your self-deception with raises, promotions, and empty praise. You're not encouraged to be honest. You're incentivized to pretend everything is fine, and it's not just work. Society constantly pushes narratives that require your complicity. Happiness, success, relationships, each comes with a neatly packaged lie. Social media insists that everyone's life is better, easier, and happier than yours. Rather than admitting your dissatisfaction, you're encouraged to portray a flawless image. The more convincing your deception, the more you're rewarded with likes, validation, and superficial social acceptance. Your personal relationships follow the same pattern. Maintaining friendships or family ties often demands ignoring uncomfortable truths. Conflict avoidance and emotional suppression are praised as maturity. You convince yourself that silence maintains harmony, when in reality it merely preserves illusions. Honest confrontation is discouraged. Dishonesty, carefully cloaked as politeness, is rewarded. Even deeper, consider your beliefs. Political and ideological systems don't thrive on honest introspection. They depend on loyalty. Questioning core beliefs is unsettling, risky, even dangerous. Easier to lie to yourself, to accept simple narratives that provide comfort. Your compliance is rewarded with belonging, acceptance, and identity. Self-deception binds you to ideologies that promise safety at the price of authenticity. But why are you so easily rewarded for lying to yourself? Because self-deception serves the powerful. It maintains social order and preserves existing hierarchies. People who lie to themselves are predictable, reliable, and easily manipulated. They consume endlessly, accept injustice passively, and rarely demand better. This pattern is disturbingly effective. Your brain itself rewards you for lying. Facing harsh truths triggers anxiety, fear, and stress. But self-deception, that releases dopamine, creating a comforting neurological loop. Your brain literally incentivizes you to ignore reality, rewarding avoidance with temporary peace, further embedding the habit of self-delusion. Yet, what's the ultimate cost of these comforting lies? Over time, the gap between your true self and the persona you project grows wider, leading to emotional numbness, disconnection, and a pervasive emptiness. You lose sight of who you truly are, buried beneath layers of deception, rewarded by a society that values appearance over substance. Acknowledging this isn't easy. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about your life, your choices, and your complicity in maintaining harmful illusions. But recognition is the first, crucial step towards reclaiming your authenticity. It means rejecting the system's shallow rewards in favor of deeper, more meaningful fulfillment. Ask yourself, are these rewards worth the price of your authenticity? Are the comforts of self-deception truly comforting or merely numbing? Honesty with oneself is the most revolutionary act because it breaks the cycle of rewarded lies. It challenges the structures designed to keep you compliant and unaware. Realize that genuine fulfillment, true freedom, comes only from confronting and embracing the truth, however uncomfortable. It demands courage, resilience, and willingness to let go of comfortable illusions. But the reward, the real reward, is incomparable authenticity, clarity, and genuine self-respect. So stop rewarding yourself for lying. The moment you choose truth over comfort, honesty over illusion, you reclaim your power and you finally meet yourself, the real you, perhaps for the first time. Forget what you were told in school. Forget the courtroom dramas. Forget the slogans etched into courthouses, justice for all, equal under the law. Because those words, they're branding, not reality. If justice were truly a principle, it would apply to everyone everywhere without exception. But it doesn't. It never has. Justice in the real world is a commodity, rationed, conditional, and often only available to those who can afford it. Now ask yourself, who gets justice quickly? Who gets heard, believed, vindicated? And who gets ignored, dismissed, or crushed under the weight of bureaucracy and delay? The answers aren't random. They follow a pattern written in class, wealth, power, and influence. We say justice is blind, but in practice it sees everything. It sees your race, your income, your connections. It weighs your status before it weighs your evidence. The wealthy don't face the system. They own it. They hire better lawyers, manipulate narratives, delay proceedings, or make problems disappear entirely. Their justice isn't served, it's sculpted. Meanwhile, for the average person, justice is a slow, expensive, and punishing process. It's waiting months for a court date, years for resolution, and sometimes a lifetime for fairness that never comes. It's being told you have rights, then watching those rights vanish the moment you can't pay for the right representation. The truth? You don't get the justice you deserve. You get the justice you can afford. This isn't just about high-profile court cases or headline scandals. It's about the daily erosion of fairness across the system. It's the tenant evicted with no warning, while the landlord walks free from responsibility. It's the worker exploited under wage theft laws that are never enforced. It's the protester jailed for speaking out, while those in power silence dissent with impunity. The system is built to appear fair while functioning as a gatekeeper. It teaches you to trust the process while ensuring the outcome is predetermined. For the privileged, justice is preventative. It protects. For everyone else, it's punitive, it punishes, that's the quiet trick. Same word, different outcomes. Worse still, justice is performative. Governments and institutions love showcasing it when it's convenient, when it suits public relations, when it distracts from deeper rot. A symbolic arrest here, a public trial there. But behind the curtain, the rules bend for those who write them. Justice becomes a spectacle, a way to sell stability, not deliver it. And if you dare to demand fairness, to challenge the imbalance, you're told to be patient, civil, respectful of the system that ignores you. You're warned not to get angry, not to disrupt, not to protest too loudly. Because when justice becomes a privilege, those without it are expected to stay quiet about the injustice. So what's the cost of pretending justice is a principle? It teaches people to wait for help that's never coming. It convinces them that the system will fix itself. It makes them blame themselves when the system fails them. It pacifies the oppressed while empowering the comfortable. But here's the hard truth. Until justice becomes unconditional, until it's removed from the grip of power and money, it will never be a principle. It will always be a transaction. And that means the fight for justice isn't about making the system work better. It's about forcing it to work for everyone, whether it wants to or not. Justice should not be a luxury item. It should not be reserved for the connected, the wealthy, or the well-spoken. It should be automatic, uncompromising, universal. Until then, stop saying justice is guaranteed. Say what it really is, a privilege distributed by design, not a principle upheld by default. Only then can we begin to fix it. You want to understand how a system really works? Don't start with the laws, don't start with the speeches or the mission statements. Start with the cash flow. Who's getting paid? How are they getting paid? And what behavior makes them the most money? Because when you follow the money, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Punishment pays. Prevention doesn't. Think about prisons, not as moral institutions, not as centers for rehabilitation, but as businesses, because that's what they are. Private prisons, prison contractors, surveillance companies, phone service vendors, they all turn a profit off incarceration. Every new inmate is a new revenue stream. Every extended sentence means another month of billing. The longer people stay trapped, the better the margins. Now ask yourself, where's the money in prevention? Where's the incentive to stop crime before it happens? To invest in mental health care, addiction support, education, community programs? There isn't one. Not really, because prevention costs money up front. And worse, it reduces future profit by reducing future crime. If people get healthy, supported, stable, they stop feeding the punishment machine. It's not just prisons, fines, fees, citations. They're all revenue tools. Cities depend on them. Police departments get budget increases, not from solving problems, but from issuing more tickets, making more arrests, generating more income. It's why low-level offences are over-policed. It's why broken windows theory became policy. Because punishing the poor is a business model. Prevention doesn't pay. Policing poverty does. And once you're in the system, every step is monetized. Court fees, probation charges, drug tests, classes, an endless stream of requirements, each with a price tag. Miss one payment, more punishment, more profit. The cycle continues. Now zoom out. What if healthcare worked this way? What if doctors made the most money by letting you get sick instead of keeping you well? Oh wait, they often do. Chronic illness, not prevention, drives pharmaceutical sales. Emergency care, not primary care, brings in the big dollars. Again, punishment for neglect is profitable, preventing the need in the first place. Not so much. The truth is simple, but devastating. Our systems are reactive by design. They don't aim to reduce suffering. They aim to manage it for profit. Prevention removes future customers. Punishment creates repeat business. That's why schools are defunded while jails expand. That's why crisis hotlines close while surveillance budgets rise. That's why society treats symptoms but ignores root causes. There's no economic incentive to build a world where fewer people need help, fewer people fall, fewer people break. Because if fewer people fall apart, there's less to punish. And if there's less to punish, there's less to monetize. So what does that mean for you? It means when something goes wrong in your life, when you struggle, when you break down, when you reach out, you're entering a system that doesn't want to stop the pain. It wants to manage your pain just enough to profit from it. You're not a person in need, you're a potential revenue stream. It also means real solutions won't come from the top down, because the top is getting paid to keep things broken. Prevention requires long-term thinking, care, investment, and a willingness to lose short-term profit. And those in power, they're not in the business of losing profit. If you want prevention to matter, you have to make it matter. You have to see where the money flows, where it stagnates, and who benefits from the pain continuing. You have to understand that systems don't operate on morality. They operate on margins. Punishment is more profitable than prevention. And that's why you keep seeing the same problems, year after year, generation after generation, because someone, somewhere, is cashing in on your suffering. That cycle doesn't break until we stop rewarding pain and start investing in prevention. Not because it's profitable, but because it's right. Not all transactions happen with cash. In fact, the most dangerous ones don't. You think being bought means signing a contract or getting a big payout. But in the real world, selling out doesn't come with a receipt. It's subtle, incremental, invisible. You don't wake up one day and say, "I've been bought." It happens piece by piece while you tell yourself you're just doing what makes sense. What's practical? What's safe? You get bought the moment you start silencing yourself in exchange for acceptance. The moment you dial back your opinions so you don't make waves at work. The moment you bite your tongue because being agreeable is more convenient than being honest. Every time you trade authenticity for comfort, you're making a deal, even if you don't realize it. It happens in careers. You start with values. You want to do good work, meaningful work, but the job pays well. The benefits are good, and slowly you shift. You stop questioning decisions. You stop challenging systems. You stop caring about the mission and start protecting the paycheck. You tell yourself it's temporary, it's necessary, but one day you look up and the person you were is gone, replaced by someone who's paid just enough to keep quiet. It happens in relationships. You adjust who you are to avoid conflict. You perform roles that aren't true just to maintain peace. You hide opinions, stifle dreams, censor truths, not because someone forced you, but because slowly you learned it was easier. You didn't get bought with money. You got bought with emotional security. It happens in society too. You adapt your public face to match the group. You play along with narratives you don't fully believe. You share opinions that aren't quite yours to avoid backlash. Likes, shares, approval, they become currency. And every time you compromise just a little for that social dopamine hit, you trade freedom for favor. This is how the system works. It doesn't need to coerce you, it just needs to reward compliance. A promotion here, a compliment there, a raise, a retweet, a pat on the head. tiny reinforcements that shape you more effectively than any threat ever could. And it's not just external rewards, your brain joins in. Every time you avoid conflict, you feel relief. Every time you blend in, you get a hit of safety. That emotional comfort becomes addictive. You don't need to be told what to do. You start doing it to yourself, voluntarily, eagerly. But here's the catch. Every transaction, no matter how small, leaves a mark. A part of you gets chipped away until you can't quite remember what your uncensored self sounded like. Until your beliefs aren't something you hold, they're something you've negotiated down. So ask yourself, what's your price? What would it take for you to trade truth for peace, conviction for comfort? If you're not careful, it won't be some big moment of selling out. It'll be 1,000 tiny compromises you never even noticed. This isn't a call for recklessness or defiance for its own sake. It's a call for awareness. Integrity doesn't disappear overnight. It gets worn down by convenience, shaped by fear, and bought by comfort. You can be bought without realizing it, but you can also wake up before the deal is done. Start paying attention. What are you trading? Who benefits? And what's it costing you to be accepted? Because sometimes the highest cost isn't paid in dollars. It's paid in silence, in surrender, and in the slow erosion of who you were meant to be. Imagine someone smiles at you, holds the door open, compliments your outfit, listens when you speak. You think, what a kind person. But what if I told you that kindness, more often than we're willing to admit, isn't rooted in compassion, but in fear? Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as cruel, selfish, or different. See, we've been taught that kindness is a virtue, a sign of strength. But peel back the layers and something else begins to emerge, something less noble, something darker. Much of what we call kindness is simply an attempt to avoid danger, psychological danger, social danger, the danger of not being liked. It starts young. You learn to be polite not because you understand empathy, but because you fear punishment. You learn to smile not because you feel joy, but because you sense that frowning invites questions. You learn to help others because not helping makes you feel wrong, guilty, exposed. And that guilt, it's not empathy. It's fear wearing a friendly mask. Fear that if you say no, people will leave you. Fear that if you're honest, you'll be judged. Fear that if you stand up for yourself, you'll be labeled difficult, or worse, mean, so you comply. You soften your tone, you swallow your opinions. You help when you're depleted. You give when it hurts. And all the while, you're praised for your kindness. But inside, you're slowly disappearing. Because what people are really praising isn't your virtue. It's your obedience, your reliability, your silence, your predictability. Kindness becomes the armor you wear to avoid confrontation, the shield that hides your anger, your sadness, your truth. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to cause waves. So you smile, nod, say no problem, even when it is a problem, and you're rewarded for it, with approval, with acceptance, with the temporary comfort of being liked. But that comfort is hollow, because deep down you know it's conditional. You know your place in people's lives depends on your performance, on how well you play the role of the agreeable, helpful, pleasant one. And you feel it when you try to stop. The moment you set a boundary, the moment you say no, the moment you act in your own interest, something shifts. The praise fades. The warmth cools. People begin to question your character because they weren't loving you. They were loving your compliance. This is the terrifying part. Kindness, when born from fear, becomes a form of self-erasure, a quiet surrender, a way of keeping the peace by making yourself invisible. It's not that genuine kindness doesn't exist. It does, but it's rarer than we like to think. True kindness is not born from fear. It doesn't shrink to avoid judgment. It doesn't bend to gain favor. True kindness has teeth. It has strength. It says no when it needs to. It risks being disliked in order to be honest. It chooses truth over harmony, integrity over comfort. And most of what we call kindness, it's the opposite. It's self-preservation masquerading as virtue. It's the fear of being unloved, disguised as compassion. It's the desperate need to belong, dressed up as empathy. We live in a world that rewards appearance over authenticity. That praises those who go along, stay quiet, do what's expected. So it's no surprise that so many of us become masters of pleasant deception, appearing kind while burying our real thoughts, needs, and desires. But here's the cost. You lose touch with who you really are. You become so practiced at pleasing others that you forget what you want, what you believe, what you feel. Your own voice becomes faint, muffled by the constant performance of politeness. And eventually, you begin to wonder, if people like me, but they don't know the real me, do they like me at all? You start to see that your kindness hasn't protected you. It's imprisoned you, because kindness rooted in fear doesn't lead to connection. It leads to resentment, to burnout, to isolation behind a smile. So the question becomes, what if you stopped? What if you chose honesty over niceness? What if you let go of the need to be liked and embraced the risk of being real? It would be terrifying and freeing, and maybe for the first time, your kindness would mean something. Because it wouldn't be a mask, it would be a choice. And that, more than anything, is what separates fear from love. One is reactive, the other intentional. Fear performs, love acts. So the next time you find yourself being kind, ask yourself, am I doing this out of compassion or out of fear? Imagine walking into a grand hall, not a courtroom, not a parliament, something older, richer, hidden, a place where decisions are made before the public ever hears about them, where power is not debated, it's enforced. And here's the unsettling truth. You don't get to vote on anything that really matters. You were told power is democratic, that the people rule, that votes shape history. But think about it. How often does your vote actually change the outcome? How often are you offered a real choice? Not two sides of the same coin, but actual divergence. Rarely, because real power doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't need your approval. Real power is inherited, bought, maneuvered into place like chess pieces, decades in advance. It operates in boardrooms, think tanks, private dinners behind closed doors. It trades in secrets, not slogans, influence, not ideology. You don't elect billionaires. You don't elect hedge funds. You don't elect the corporations that write legislation before politicians even see it. You vote for the face of power, not its spine. It's designed that way. Because illusion is safer than confrontation. If you believe your voice matters equally, if you believe the system is fair, you won't rebel. You'll play along, casting ballots, debating policies, arguing online, all while the real decisions are made far above your reach. This isn't just conspiracy, it's structure, it's design. Consider how laws are passed. Lobbyists write the language. Politicians, many of whom rely on those very lobbyists for campaign funds, rubber stamp it. Regulatory agencies are filled with former industry executives. Then they return to those industries once their public service is done. It's a revolving door, and you are never invited inside. Look at wealth. The people with the most influence are those with the most capital. They don't need elections. They own the platforms that shape what you see. They fund the candidates. They bankroll the media narratives. And if an outsider threatens that order, they don't need to be voted out. They'll be crushed, co-opted, or quietly erased. Ask yourself this: if power truly belonged to the people, would income inequality be this obscene? Would billion-dollar corporations evade taxes while entire cities crumble? Would healthcare be a luxury? Would truth be auctioned off to the highest bidder? Real power doesn't defend itself in public debates. It doesn't need to. It's protected by layers: media, money, myth. You're given just enough agency to feel involved, never enough to truly disrupt. Even protest becomes part of the illusion. You're allowed to march, to shout, to sign petitions, as long as the wheels keep turning, as long as the machine stays intact. Real power tolerates protest, but try withholding your labor. Try cutting off its profits. Then you'll see the mask fall. And what about justice? Do you think it's blind? Or does it peek out from under the blindfold to check your bank account, your connections, your influence? You can't vote away corruption. That's legal. You can't vote out billionaires who were never on a ballot. You can't reform a system whose foundation was built to serve itself. So what can you do? You recognize it. You stop pretending. You stop swallowing the lie that representation is the same as control, that participation equals power. You start seeing who really holds the strings and how they keep pulling them. And then, only then, you begin to shift the question. Not who should we vote for, but why do we let them rule at all? Because once you accept that real power is never voted for, you're no longer just a pawn in the game. You become a threat to the board. And that's where change begins, not with ballots, but with awakening. Imagine two startup founders. One becomes a billionaire, their face splashed across magazines, invited to give TED Talks, praised as a genius. The other disappears into obscurity. Same intelligence, same effort, same idea, even the difference: luck. And that's what makes this so disturbing, because we've built an entire mythology around success. We believe success is a reflection of merit, that if someone is rich, famous, or powerful, they must have earned it. They must be smarter, harder working, more visionary than the rest. But that's not the full story. It never was. What you're really seeing, more often than not, is survival bias. Survival bias is the illusion that success stories are the only ones that matter, because they're the only ones you hear. You look at the winners, the survivors, the exceptions, and you forget the thousands who followed the same path and failed. Not because they lacked talent, not because they didn't try hard enough, but because the world is chaos dressed in a business suit. We love stories of college dropouts becoming tech giants, but we never read about the thousands of dropouts who now live paycheck to paycheck. We idolize the athlete who made it out of poverty, but forget the countless others who trained just as hard and never got noticed. The media doesn't cover failure. Failure doesn't sell, but it's everywhere, quietly screaming beneath the noise of celebration. And if you're not careful, you start to internalize this lie that success is destiny and failure is a moral flaw, that the winners deserve everything they get and the rest just weren't good enough. It's a seductive story. It makes the world feel fair, predictable. But it's not. Success is a lottery, a brutal, silent game of probabilities, privilege, timing, and access. Hard work plays a role, but luck plays a louder one. This is what survival bias hides. The truth that most success stories are statistical outliers, the exception, not the rule. When we study the successful, we only analyze the visible tip of the iceberg. We forget the sunken mass beneath the surface, the failures, the broken, the overlooked. It's not just misleading, it's dangerous. Because when you believe success is always earned, you become cruel. You begin to despise the struggling. You blame them. You call them lazy, undisciplined, unworthy. And worst of all, you apply that same venom inward. Every missed opportunity becomes your fault. Every failure, a personal indictment. Survival bias doesn't just distort how we view others, it poisons how we see ourselves. And then there's the institutions, the systems. They thrive on survival bias. They promote a few stories of triumph to justify the exploitation of millions. Look, they say, he made it. You can too. It's the ultimate distraction. Convince people the game is fair and they'll keep playing it, no matter how rigged it is. Even in education, we praise the school that produced a Nobel laureate, but ignore the thousands of other students it failed. In business, we celebrate the CEO who turned a garage into a corporation, but erase the years of unpaid labor, inherited wealth, or insider connections that made it possible. The myth of meritocracy keeps us compliant. It convinces us that success is just a matter of trying hard enough, that if we just believe, grind, and sacrifice, we'll be rewarded. But meritocracy without equal opportunity is a lie, a comforting lie, and survival bias is what keeps it alive. So what does this mean for you? It means you need to stop comparing your backstage to someone else's highlight reel. It means questioning every story that makes success sound inevitable. It means remembering that for every shining star, there are galaxies of talent that never got their light. It means having compassion for others and for yourself. Because maybe you didn't fail, maybe you just didn't get lucky, and maybe that's the most honest, most human truth there is. Success isn't a mirror of your worth. It's a ghost story told by the few who made it out alive. And survival bias is the haunting silence of those who didn't. Imagine waking up, groggy, grabbing your phone, and scrolling through headlines. A fire in a distant city, a murder in a quiet suburb, a scandal rocking a political party. It feels urgent, important, like the world is unraveling and you must stay tuned just to survive it. But here's the question no one wants you to ask. Is this information, or is it bait? We like to believe that the news exists to inform us, to keep us educated, prepared, aware, but that's the illusion. That's the trick. The disturbing truth, the primary purpose of modern news isn't to inform you, it's to keep you watching. Think about the structure of most news. Breaking updates, red banners, urgent music, endless loops of the same footage, the same talking points, the same fear-stoking language. That's not information architecture. That's psychological engineering. News outlets are businesses. They don't sell facts. They sell your attention. And the more anxious, outraged, or afraid you are, the longer you stay glued to the screen. Fear boosts ratings. Outrage drives clicks. Confusion increases engagement. This isn't an accident. It's design. Notice what's rarely reported. Progress, nuance, calm resolution. Those don't sell. Those don't make you scroll. What does? Crisis, division, sensationalism. The world isn't necessarily getting worse. It's just being curated to seem that way. And this curation creates a distorted mirror. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as the algorithm wants you to see it. Think about how this affects you. Every day, you're absorbing stories that make you feel powerless, enraged, and perpetually on edge. And every time you react, comment, share, click, you're not resisting the system. you're feeding it. The media cycle isn't built for clarity, it's built for addiction. The endless scroll, the just one more video, the autoplay that pulls you deeper. These aren't tools of education, they're mechanisms of retention. The more time you spend consuming, the more ads you see, the more data they collect, the more money they make. That's the real economy of modern news, your emotional volatility converted into corporate profit. And the most insidious part, the illusion of choice. You think you're choosing what to watch. In reality, the algorithm chooses for you, learning what keeps you angry, what keeps you scared, and what keeps you watching. You're not informed, you're conditioned. Conditioned to fear your neighbor. Conditioned to distrust anyone who thinks differently. Conditioned to see the world not as a complex place full of nuance, but as a battlefield where every headline is a weapon. This is how division is monetized, how polarization becomes profitable. The news doesn't just report conflict, it manufactures it, sustains it, amplifies it. And when the dust settles, when the facts eventually emerge, when the story is corrected or clarified, it's buried. Because clarity doesn't trend, resolution doesn't go viral. What matters is the first impression, the emotional jolt, the hot take, the rapid-fire reaction. You're not being educated, you're being primed. Primed to feel rather than think, to react rather than reflect. Because reflection is slow, deliberation is boring, thoughtfulness doesn't sell ads. But here's the kicker. This system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. The goal isn't truth, it's engagement. And engagement doesn't care if you're informed. It only cares that you don't look away. So ask yourself, how much of what you believe is truly your belief, and how much has been fed to you, piece by piece, headline by headline, until it felt like your own thought? This is not a call to abandon the news. It's a call to question it, to recognize that not all information is created equal, that some truths are drowned in noise, that sometimes being informed starts with turning the volume down. Because if you don't, you risk becoming what the system wants most, a perpetual viewer, not a thinker, not a citizen. Just another pair of eyes, another captive mind. The news isn't there to serve you, it's there to survive you. And the best way to survive in a world of noise is to learn when to stop listening. Picture a fire spreading across the forest. You see the smoke in the distance. You hear the warnings, but the flames aren't at your doorstep yet. So you keep scrolling, you keep sipping your coffee. You convince yourself it's not your problem. Not yet. This is how most people live. They don't care until it hurts them. It's not because they're evil. It's because they're human. We're wired for proximity, for immediacy, for survival. If the pain isn't personal, the urgency doesn't register. A tragedy in another city, a crisis in another country. You might care for a moment. You might even post about it. But then you go back to your life, untouched, unchanged, until the fire reaches your door. There's a cruel logic to human empathy. It narrows with distance. A single tear on a friend's face can move you more than the suffering of thousands halfway across the world. The closer the pain, the sharper it cuts. And until you bleed, you often don't believe. This is why injustice thrives. Not because people are incapable of compassion, but because they wait. They wait until the system that crushed others finally turns on them, until their job is gone, until their house is underwater, until their child can't afford medicine. Then suddenly they care, then they rage. But by then, the fire has already consumed too much. You see it with poverty. When it's just statistics, it's easy to ignore, but lose your own job, struggle to pay rent, and suddenly you see it everywhere. You recognize the desperation in every grocery store aisle, every overdue bill. The empathy arrives, but late, always late. Look at politics. As long as policies hurt someone else, they're tolerable. As long as surveillance is used on others, it's justified. But the moment it touches your rights, your freedom, your voice, that's when you protest. That's when you notice. When it becomes real, this isn't just individual failure. It's a systemic one. Society teaches you to disconnect, to believe that other people's problems are none of your business. That empathy is a luxury, not a duty. You're told to focus on yourself, your goals, your grind. And so you look away. Not because you lack a heart, but because the system keeps you distracted, comfortable, and just detached enough to never feel the full weight of someone else's pain. And the media, it knows this. Stories that don't affect you directly are packaged like entertainment, flashy, brief, disposable. They're designed to keep you informed enough to feel aware, but not enough to act. So the cycle repeats. People don't care until it hurts them. But when it does, when the pain becomes personal, it's often too late. The damage is done. The structure that failed someone else has now collapsed on you. And you wonder why no one warned you, why no one helped. But they did. You just weren't listening. And now you know why the world doesn't change. Because waiting until it hurts is always too late. Real change demands preemptive empathy. It demands that you care before you're forced to, that you listen when it's not your voice being silenced, that you fight when it's not your fight, because eventually it will be. The truth is brutal. The fire is always coming. If you only react when the flames touch your skin, you've already lost. So the question is, how close does the pain need to be before you finally care? And by then, what's left to save? Think about the last time you changed your mind, not about something small, something big, something that shattered your worldview, made you rethink everything, forced you to confront a truth you didn't want to believe. Now ask yourself this: what convinced you? Was it a perfectly reasoned argument? A tidy stack of facts? Or was it something else, something raw, emotional, maybe even irrational? Here's the disturbing truth. Facts don't change minds. Emotions do. Truth, as noble as it sounds, doesn't spread on its own. It's fragile, quiet, easy to overlook. But emotion is viral. Emotion doesn't wait to be verified. It doesn't need evidence. It doesn't care about nuance. It just explodes, and it takes everything with it. This is why lies spread faster than truth, why propaganda works, why disinformation dominates the internet, because it's not about what's true, it's about what's felt, what triggers, what provokes. Our brains aren't designed to reward accuracy. They're designed to reward survival. And survival isn't about being right. It's about reacting fast. That's why fear, outrage, and tribalism hijack our attention. They activate our ancient instincts. Truth doesn't stand a chance in the face of a well-crafted emotional hook. You've seen it on social media, in politics, in the stories we tell. The most shared content isn't the most accurate. It's the most outrageous, the most heart-wrenching, the most infuriating. Algorithms aren't searching for truth. They're searching for engagement. They don't care if something is real. They care if it keeps you scrolling, clicking, sharing, and what keeps you hooked: emotion. This is why bad actors succeed, why manipulators rise. They don't need to be right. They just need to feel right. They craft narratives that bypass logic and sink directly into your nervous system. They make you angry, afraid, validated, and once you're emotionally hooked, the truth becomes irrelevant. We like to believe that if people just knew the facts, they'd see things clearly, that ignorance is the enemy. But ignorance is easy to fix. Emotional attachment. That's harder. Once someone feels a certain way, truth becomes an obstacle, not a solution. It threatens identity. It feels like an attack. And so truth dies. Not because it isn't known, but because it isn't felt. This is why debates often fail. Why logic rarely changes hearts. Because truth without emotion is sterile. It feels cold, disconnected. And in a world saturated with noise, only what screams gets heard. It's not that truth has no power. It does. But only when it rides the wave of emotion. Only when it taps into something deeper than data, something visceral. This is why storytelling matters. Why metaphors work. Why art and music can reveal truths no textbook ever could. They make truth feel real. They make it stick. And this has consequences. Because if the truth needs emotion to survive, then whoever controls emotion controls the truth. And that means reality itself becomes a battlefield, not of facts, but of feelings. The terrifying part, most people don't even realize it's happening. They believe they've reached conclusions rationally, independently. But in truth, their beliefs were sculpted by repetition, by community, by emotional resonance, not by evidence, not by accuracy. Even you, even now, you are not immune to this. None of us are. We are emotional creatures, first and foremost. Rationality came later, and it's always been playing catch-up. So what do you do with this knowledge? You stop pretending that truth alone is enough. You learn to speak the language of emotion, not to manipulate, but to connect. You tell stories. You create meaning. You wrap truth in feelings so it can finally breathe. Because if you don't, someone else will, and they'll use emotion to bury the truth instead. The truth doesn't spread. Emotion does. And if we don't understand that, if we don't learn to wield that, we will keep losing to those who already do. Imagine a billionaire on stage, handing out oversized checks, cameras flashing, the crowd applauding, a donation to end hunger, a pledge for clean water, a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth. It looks noble, it feels generous. But what if it's not? What if charity isn't about helping others at all, but about preserving power? The disturbing truth is that charity often hides exploitation. It masks systemic harm with individual acts of generosity. It tells you the world is getting better, while keeping the structures that cause suffering intact. Start with this: where does the wealth come from? The same billionaires praised for their philanthropy often built their empires on underpaid labor, tax avoidance, and environmental destruction. Their profit is extracted from the very people they later help. Their generosity is funded by your struggle. And yet, when they donate a fraction of their fortune, they're celebrated. They're called heroes, saints, visionaries. The narrative shifts from critique to gratitude. You're told to be thankful. But thankful for what? For the scraps handed back after the feast. Charity becomes a public relations tool, a way to sanitize reputations, deflect criticism, and maintain control. It says, look at what I'm giving, so you don't ask. Look at what you took, but the deception runs deeper. Charity shifts the blame. Instead of holding systems accountable, it individualizes both suffering and solution. You're told poverty exists because people haven't donated enough. Not because wages are suppressed, healthcare is privatized, or housing is treated as a commodity. You're shown images of starving children, crumbling schools, and disaster-struck towns. You're moved to act, to give. But you're never encouraged to question why those conditions exist in the first place. Because if you did, you might realize something dangerous, that your empathy is being used against you, used to keep you passive, to keep you compliant, to keep you believing that the system can be fixed with kindness rather than justice. Even the non-profits themselves, many of them depend on suffering to justify their existence. The cycle of problem and solution becomes a business model. The goal isn't to end the problem, it's to manage it, sustain it, make it just visible enough to evoke donations, but never inconvenient enough to demand real change. And who decides where the money goes? Not the people affected, not the communities struggling, but boards of directors, executives, outsiders who parachute in with plans and solutions that often ignore context, culture, or history. This isn't empowerment. It's control wrapped in compassion. It's a way to maintain hierarchy while appearing benevolent. And it works because it feels good. Giving feels good. Helping feels good. And the system knows that. So you're encouraged to donate, to volunteer, to participate in charity drives. All the while, the root causes remain untouched. The machine keeps turning. Inequality deepens. And you keep believing you're making a difference. But here's the hard truth. Charity is not justice. Justice is fair wages, universal healthcare, access to education, clean air and water for everyone, not just those lucky enough to be noticed. Justice doesn't ask for donations. It demands accountability. And that makes people uncomfortable. Because charity flatters the giver, justice confronts them. So we keep choosing charity because it's safer, easier, applauded. But every time we do, we reinforce the very structures we claim to oppose. Every time we celebrate a billionaire's donation, we ignore the exploitation that made it possible. Every time we rely on charity to fix what systems broke, we surrender power to those least willing to share it. So, what can you do? Start by asking better questions. Who benefits? Who decides? Who's missing from the table? And most importantly, what are we trying to fix? And why is it broken? Because until we confront those questions, charity will remain what it so often is, not a solution, but a symptom. A way to soothe our conscience without challenging our comfort. And the world will keep thanking the people who broke it for offering to help clean up the mess. You've been lied to about reputation. You were told it reflects who you are, your integrity, your character, your truth. But here's the disturbing reality. Reputation isn't a mirror, it's a weapon. One that can be forged, manipulated, sharpened, and used against you without warning. Reputation isn't built on truth, it's built on perception. And perception is dangerously fragile. You could spend years cultivating kindness, honesty, and trust, but it only takes one whisper, one accusation, one well-placed lie to shatter it all. And the worst part? It doesn't even have to be true. In the court of public opinion, evidence is optional. Emotion wins. Outrage wins. The loudest voice in the room wins. That's why powerful people don't just protect their reputation, they weaponize it. They understand its value, not as a reflection of truth, but as a tool of control. Influence isn't just about being good, it's about being seen as good. And if you control the narrative, you control everything. This is how elites maintain their grip. They don't fear exposure. They fear losing the illusion. They pay PR teams to craft personas, scrub their names from scandals, bury stories under layers of noise. They trade reputation like currency, buying favor, silencing dissent, and rewriting history. Meanwhile, if you make a mistake, real or imagined, your reputation can be destroyed in seconds. No investigation, no context. Just a digital mob, a wave of judgment, and a story that spreads faster than you can defend yourself. You were taught that reputation is earned, but often it's assigned, and it can be stolen, tarnished, or weaponized, regardless of who you really are. Think about social hierarchies. In school, in work, in politics. Reputation determines your access to opportunity, respect, safety. It shapes how you're treated long before your words are ever heard. People don't engage with your reality. They engage with your image. And those who understand this game use it to dominate. Smear campaigns, character assassinations, strategic praise, selective silence. These aren't outliers. They're standard tactics in a world where optics matter more than substance. Even in personal relationships, reputation is a form of leverage. People exaggerate their virtues, hide their flaws, curate every detail of their identity, because they know that being seen a certain way can unlock doors, and being seen the wrong way can slam them shut. So what happens when you refuse to play the game? When you value truth over perception, you become vulnerable. Honest people are easy targets in a world ruled by image, because reputation doesn't care if you're real. It cares if you're believable, and believability can be manufactured. The most dangerous part, reputation controls behavior. People self-censor, bend, contort themselves to avoid reputational damage. Fear of judgment becomes internalized. You stop saying what you think. You start becoming what the world expects, because you know how fast it can turn on you. And in that fear, they've got you. Controlled, silenced, shaped. Because if your identity is tied to your reputation, then you'll protect it at all costs, even if it means betraying yourself. So remember this, reputation isn't your truth. It's a mask, forged by others, worn for survival. It can be used to uplift or to destroy. And those in power don't wear it honestly. They wield it like a blade. Reputation is not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of who the world needs you to be. And the more you understand that, the harder you become to control. Picture two people in a room. One speaks with ease, makes eye contact, gestures boldly. Their words flow like they've rehearsed them 1,000 times, even if they haven't. The other stumbles, hesitates, second guesses. Their voice cracks, their points trail off. But here's the twist. The second person is an expert. The first, just really good at sounding like one. And yet, who do we believe? Confidence, not competence. That's the uncomfortable truth. We're wired to trust the person who looks like they know what they're doing, even if they don't. It's not about facts, it's about vibes. Authority is performed, not proven. And the world rewards those who play the part. Think about job interviews. The room isn't designed to test your ability to do the job. It's designed to test how well you can present yourself under pressure. The confident candidate, smiling, assertive, self-assured, walks out with the offer. The competent one, maybe awkward, maybe anxious, maybe honest about their limitations, walks out unemployed. In politics, the stakes are even higher. Voters don't fact-check policies. They respond to tone, posture, delivery. The candidate who sounds like a leader becomes one. Even if they lie, even if they cheat, even if they can't deliver on a single promise. Because confidence is persuasive, even when it's empty. And this isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. We've been conditioned through media, marketing, culture to equate confidence with truth, to mistake charisma for credibility. A loud voice drowns out quiet wisdom. A bold lie beats a cautious truth. And over time, the game shifts. It's not about being right, it's about sounding right. Look at social media. The confident voice, unapologetic, absolute, provocative, goes viral. The thoughtful, uncertain, nuanced one, buried in the algorithm. We reward conviction, not contemplation, certainty, not curiosity. And in the process, we elevate people who are confident enough to say anything, regardless of whether it's true. The workplace reflects this too. How many promotions go to those who talk the most in meetings, not those who think the deepest? How many decisions are made by those who pitch ideas loudly, not those who analyze them rigorously? We call it leadership potential, but often it's just performance. And this performance isn't without cost. Because when we prize confidence above competence, we create a culture where pretending becomes more valuable than knowing, where bluster beats evidence, where arrogance is mistaken for intelligence. And those who are cautious, reflective, self-critical, often the most competent of all, get sidelined, dismissed, ignored. It's worse than unfair. It's dangerous. Because confidence doesn't mean correctness. But once it's mistaken for it, the consequences multiply. Mistakes go unchallenged. Flaws go unnoticed. Harm goes unchecked. And those with actual skill are silenced under the roar of the self-assured. This isn't to say confidence is meaningless. It's powerful, necessary even. But it should be the result of competence, not a substitute for it. And we rarely stop to ask, is this person actually qualified, or do they just sound like they are? The sad irony: competent people are often less confident, not because they're less capable, but because they know more. They understand complexity. They grasp uncertainty. They know what they don't know. And that humility makes them hesitate. Meanwhile, the truly ignorant are often the loudest, their certainty unburdened by depth. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. The less someone knows, the more confident they tend to be. And the more someone knows, the more aware they are of their limitations. But we reward the wrong end of that spectrum. So what do? We learn to question confidence. We dig deeper. We stop assuming that presence equals mastery. And we start listening for substance, not just style. Because if we don't, we'll keep choosing the loudest voice in the room, while the most capable one stays silent in the corner. Confidence is compelling, but competence is what actually holds the world together. We just have to start valuing it before it's too late. Have you ever noticed how every system that's supposed to help you, education, healthcare, politics, justice, always seems to fall short, always inefficient, always underfunded, always in crisis? We're told these are bugs, flaws, accidents of complexity. But what if they're not? What if the dysfunction isn't a mistake, but the design? Every system is designed to stay broken. Because broken systems don't just survive, they serve someone. Let's start with education. You're told it's about learning, growth, opportunity. But why then is it structured like a factory? Why does it punish creativity, reward obedience, and churn out workers, not thinkers? Because education isn't designed to liberate. It's designed to prepare you for submission, to teach you to follow rules, not question them, to memorize, not analyze, to meet standards, not challenge them. A broken education system doesn't fail everyone. It produces exactly what the system needs: compliant, exhausted adults, trained to accept the world as it is. Now look at healthcare, supposedly a system to heal, to protect. But in practice, it's a business, a commodity. Healing becomes a service, priced and rationed. And when you're sick, you're not a person, you're a revenue stream. The longer you're dependent, the more profitable you become. Why fix a system that turns suffering into income? You don't. You let it break further. You let people fight over scraps, because desperation is easy to control. Then there's politics. The illusion of representation. You vote, you hope, you wait. But year after year, nothing truly changes. because politics isn't designed to serve you. It's a theater of promises masking a marketplace of power. Politicians answer to donors, not voters. The system rewards performance, not integrity. Loyalty, not truth. And so it remains broken, conveniently, predictably, because a broken political system keeps you blaming the other side, never the structure itself. Even justice, perhaps the most sacred illusion of all. We tell ourselves justice is blind, impartial, fair. But in reality, it sees everything: your race, your status, your wealth. It weighs them carefully before ever looking at evidence. The poor wait, the rich settle, the powerful evade. And yet, the system endures. Because justice isn't about fairness. It's about order, maintaining the appearance of accountability without ever threatening the foundations of power. You see the pattern now, don't you? Every system pretends to serve the public, but their real purpose is preservation, of hierarchy, of profit, of control. The chaos you experience isn't the result of failure. It's the product of careful design. Bureaucracy, red tape, waiting lists, underfunded schools, inaccessible medicine, political gridlock. They're not problems to be solved. They're features of a machine that only works for the few at the expense of the many. And the brilliance of it: you're trained to blame yourself. You didn't study hard enough. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't vote hard enough. It's your fault, not the system's. So you try harder, push further, burn out faster, all while the system hums along, extracting your energy, your time, your hope, without ever intending to change. Because change threatens stability, and stability is the currency of the powerful. Fixing the system means redistributing power, and those with power will never allow that willingly. So instead, they let it stay broken. Broken enough to keep you chasing solutions, functional enough to maintain control. But what if you stopped believing it was an accident? What if you saw the dysfunction for what it really is: a smokescreen, a distraction, a design? Then maybe you'd stop fixing yourself to fit the system and start questioning why the system demands your brokenness to survive. Because until that question is asked and answered, the systems will remain exactly as they are. Not because they can't be fixed, but because they were never meant to be. Imagine a world where your pain is someone else's profit. Now stop imagining. That world is this one, and it always has been. Suffering isn't just tolerated. It's monetized, packaged, scaled, sold. Behind every crisis, every addiction, every moment of despair, there's a profit model humming quietly in the background. The deeper the pain, the bigger the payout. Take healthcare. You'd think its goal is healing, but look closer. Chronic illness. That's not a tragedy. It's a business plan. Pharmaceutical companies don't celebrate cures. They celebrate customers. Lifelong prescriptions, repeat procedures, treatment, not resolution. Because a cured patient is a lost sale, but a suffering patient is a revenue stream. Think that's harsh? Ask yourself, why are insulin prices still skyrocketing? Why do cancer drugs cost tens of thousands? Why are mental health services rationed unless you're wealthy? Because your suffering fuels an economy, and the system is designed to keep it going. Now look at addiction. Not just to drugs, but to screens, sugar, gambling, social validation. Every click, every swipe, every anxious glance at your phone is data, is revenue. Tech companies use psychological manipulation to keep you hooked. Your dopamine spikes aren't accidents. They're engineered. You think you're the customer, you're the product. Your attention, your impulses, your compulsions, they're tracked, harvested, and monetized at scale. The more addicted you become, the more predictable you are. And the more predictable you are, the easier you are to exploit. Even tragedy becomes marketable. A school shooting, that's a media event. Watch the coverage. Count the ad breaks. Your outrage is monetized. Your grief becomes engagement. And somewhere in a meeting room, analysts track which headlines drive the most clicks. Disaster relief, big business. War, lucrative. Every time chaos erupts, someone profits from the rebuilding, the arms contracts, the reconstruction loans. Suffering isn't a side effect, it's part of the cycle. The demand never ends, so the supply never will. And while this sounds inhuman, it isn't. It's deeply human. It's how our systems were built, not around empathy, but efficiency. Not to reduce pain, but to extract value from it. Because pain creates need, and need creates dependency. And dependency, that's the gold mine. Think of debt, student loans, medical bills, credit cards. Entire industries exist to capitalize on your desperation. They don't want you to default, but they don't want you to escape either. The goal isn't solvency, it's servitude. Lifelong repayment, lifelong control. Now go deeper. Look at entertainment. How many true crime shows feed off real trauma? How many dramas glamorize poverty, violence, abuse, turning lived horror into prime-time spectacle? Even your empathy is monetized. Your tears, your curiosity, your emotional investment, sold in hour-long segments, backed by advertisers. And here's the darkest part. The more normalized it becomes, the harder it is to see. You don't notice the exploitation because it's woven into everything. You're told it's just how things work, that it's inevitable, that markets are neutral, but they aren't. They follow pain like vultures follow smoke. Because in a system that prioritizes profit above people, suffering is not a bug, it's the business model. So the next time you see suffering, ask not who's helping, but who's cashing in. Because until we recognize how deeply pain has been commodified, we will never understand why the world resists healing. And the truth is brutal. Your pain may be personal, but to them it's just product. Power doesn't exist to serve you. It doesn't exist to protect the weak, uplift the just, or ensure fairness. That's the illusion. That's the myth. They feed you to keep you obedient, to keep you quiet, to keep you believing that justice is just a matter of time. But here's the disturbing truth. Power protects itself first. Always, before it protects you, before it protects truth, before it protects morality. Power's first instinct is survival. It doesn't matter if that power wears a uniform, a robe, a badge, or a suit. It doesn't matter if it speaks in the name of democracy, religion, science, or law. The moment power is threatened, it circles the wagons, it erases evidence, it silences dissent. It rewrites the narrative to cast itself as the hero and everyone else as a threat. This isn't new. This isn't rare. This is how power works. Look at history. Scandals don't break because institutions expose themselves. They break because someone leaks the truth, and even then, only if the public outrage is too loud to ignore. The default setting is concealment. The instinct is always protection. Police departments cover for officers who abuse their authority. Religious organizations shield abusers to preserve reputation. Corporations bury safety violations to protect profits. Governments classify documents, suppress protests, imprison whistleblowers, all to protect themselves from the truth. You think the system will protect you because you've done nothing wrong. But that's not how power thinks. To power, wrong and right are irrelevant. What matters is threat. What matters is control. If you threaten the image, the profit, the authority, it will come for you, regardless of your innocence. and it will justify it after the fact. Power doesn't play by the rules, it writes them. And when it breaks them, it simply rewrites the narrative. Mistakes were made. Policy changes are being considered. A few sacrificial scapegoats, maybe never the core, never the structure. The system pretends to reform while ensuring it remains untouched at its foundation. Because if real change happened, if real accountability was enforced, power would have to face itself, and it won't. It never has. Instead, it adapts, rebrands, updates its language, makes performative gestures, apologizes publicly while doubling down privately, all to maintain the illusion that it cares, that it's listening, that it's just. But watch closely. In every moment of crisis, ask one question: who is power protecting right now? And you'll see the pattern, you'll see the cover-ups, the gaslighting, the distraction tactics. The focus shifts from the harm done to the potential embarrassment of being caught. The institution doesn't grieve the damage, it fears the damage to its image. Power wants you compliant, not empowered. It wants your faith, your labor, your silence. It teaches you that change happens through the proper channels, that rebellion is dangerous, that authority knows best. It molds your perception so thoroughly that even when you see the cracks, you hesitate to question it, because questioning power feels unsafe. And that fear, that hesitation, that's by design. Power doesn't maintain itself with force alone. It survives through belief, through trust, through the hope that it will protect you, even when it never has, even when it never will. And if you ever threaten that trust by exposing corruption, demanding justice, organizing resistance, power will turn on you. It won't matter how polite, how lawful, how reasonable you are. The moment you become inconvenient, you become expendable. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the system. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. And what it reveals is a simple, brutal truth. It will burn the world down before it gives itself up, because power never protects you. It protects itself. First, always. You followed the rules. You kept your head down. You did everything right. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you began to disappear. Not physically, not at first, but in the meetings where your ideas are glossed over, in the relationships where your silence is mistaken for agreement, in the daily routines that feel more like scripts than choices. You vanish, not in one dramatic act, but in 1,000 tiny concessions. Because here's the cruel paradox. The more obedient you become, the less visible you are. We're taught from childhood that obedience is virtue. Follow the rules, be polite, wait your turn, don't question, don't resist. Good behavior is rewarded, or so they say. But over time, that reward becomes more abstract. Praise turns into expectation. Your compliance is no longer noticed, it's assumed. And soon you're not being seen at all. You're being used. Obedience, in theory, is supposed to earn you trust. In practice, it earns you invisibility. The more you conform, the more you blend in. And blending in sounds safe, even smart. But blending in too well makes you disappear. You become part of the wallpaper, expected to perform, but not to speak. Present, but not present enough to disrupt. Have you noticed how rebellion gets attention? How dissent is spotlighted, feared, even respected, while obedience is quietly ignored? The disobedient might be punished, yes, but at least they're acknowledged. At least the world is forced to reckon with their presence. Obedience doesn't get reckoned with, it gets absorbed. Think about your workplace. The one who questions the policy, even clumsily, is remembered. The one who follows it to the letter, they become a cog, interchangeable, replaceable. not because they lack value, but because their obedience has made them predictable. And predictability is the first step toward erasure. This isn't just about jobs, it's about identity. Because every time you suppress a disagreement, swallow a boundary, or nod when you should speak, you reinforce an illusion that your role matters more than yourself, that who you are is less important than what you comply with, until eventually, even you forget where the performance ends and you begin. Obedience becomes a habit, a reflex. You stop asking why. You stop noticing. You've stopped asking. Life becomes an endless series of boxes to check, not because they make sense, but because not checking them feels dangerous. You stay in line because stepping out of it feels like stepping off a cliff. But here's the unsettling part. Society likes you that way. Systems are built on the quiet labor of invisible people. Governments, corporations, institutions, they function best when you don't make noise, when you obey without question, when you confuse being good with being silent. Your obedience feeds the machine, and your disappearance is its most convenient byproduct. Obedience strips you of edges, of friction, of presence, and yet you're still here. You're still human. So the absence creates tension. You feel it in your gut, the quiet resentment, the vague discontent. You're praised for being agreeable, but punished when that agreement feels hollow. You become emotionally bankrupt, and no one notices because no one's looking, because you trained them not to. You told the world you were fine. You taught them to ignore your no by never saying it. You hid your anger, your creativity, your dissent. And now you wonder why no one sees you. You obeyed so well that you became background noise, reliable, safe, invisible. But invisibility has a cost. You start to feel erased, not just by others, but by yourself. You can't rebel because you no longer remember what rebellion would even look like. You forgot how to want something that hasn't already been approved. You stopped needing permission, and yet you still wait for it. And here lies the danger. Invisible people are easy to ignore, but they're also easy to discard. Obedience is not loyalty, it's not protection, it's camouflage. And when the system changes, when it no longer needs you, your compliance doesn't save you. It only ensures that your exit is silent. To be seen, truly seen, requires risk. It requires contradiction, disruption, honesty. You must be willing to say no, to be disliked, to confuse those who've come to rely on your compliance. Visibility isn't given to the obedient. It's claimed by the defiant. The more you obey, the less you're seen. And if you want to be seen, really seen, you'll have to stop disappearing on purpose. You'll have to remember that silence isn't safety, that being good isn't the same as being whole, that obedience is not identity, because the world doesn't need more invisible people. It needs people brave enough to be seen, even if it means being misunderstood, even if it means being loud, even if it means being disobedient, especially then. You wake up in a world where standing alone feels like death, not because it is, but because you've been trained to believe it is. From your earliest memories, you've been surrounded by subtle cues, whispered rules, and invisible expectations. Fit in, follow along, belong. The classroom teaches more than arithmetic. It teaches obedience. The playground teaches more than games. It teaches hierarchy. Every institution, every structure, every social script carries the same underlying command: don't stand out. And whatever you do, don't stand alone. Because standing alone means exposure, vulnerability, rejection. And rejection, in the human psyche, registers like a physical wound. You're wired to fear it. Because in evolutionary terms, exile was once a death sentence. Our ancestors didn't survive alone in the wild. They survived in groups, by conforming, by belonging. That deep fear of social rejection didn't vanish with civilization. It simply evolved. Now it hides in boardrooms, classrooms, family dinners. It whispers through likes, comments, and follows. It punishes you quietly every time you dare to deviate. The punishment isn't always direct. No, it's subtler than that. You get passed over, ignored, left out of the joke, the meeting, the invitation. A chill sets in, not from the weather, but from the silence that follows non-conformity. That silence is engineered. It's there to nudge you back into the fold, to teach you that being right means nothing. If you're alone, that your truth, no matter how clear, is dangerous without a crowd to echo it. So you adjust. You laugh at things that aren't funny. You nod at ideas that make your stomach turn. You hide your real questions behind polite smiles, not because you're weak, but because you've been taught over and over that standing alone isn't brave. It's stupid. It's reckless. It's social suicide. And society rewards compliance with comfort. Fitting in comes with perks, validation, approval, opportunity. Challenge the narrative, and suddenly those perks disappear. That promotion, gone. That friend group, drifting. That family support, conditional. You start to see the strings, tied not to your performance or your character, but to your compliance, to your willingness to keep quiet and stay small. But here's the cruel twist. The more you conform, the more invisible you become. Your edges blur. Your voice weakens. You become another interchangeable part in a machine that only values you when you stop questioning. Standing alone feels terrifying. But losing yourself, that happens quietly, gradually, and it's even more dangerous. Consider the whistleblowers, the activists, the artists, the revolutionaries. They all had one thing in common. They stood alone, first, before the applause, before the movements, before history rewrote them as heroes. They were outcasts, ridiculed, ostracized, alone, and many of them broke under the weight of it, because society doesn't just fear dissent, it crucifies it. And yet, something miraculous happens when you resist the fear. When you let yourself be seen fully, despite the risk, you become real. You become undeniable. You stop trading authenticity for acceptance. And in that brutal honesty, something rare emerges: clarity, power, freedom. But make no mistake, standing alone still hurts. It's lonely. It's raw. It strips away the illusion of safety. It forces you to confront who you are without the masks. But that pain, that's growth, that's transformation, that's the price of becoming someone the world can't ignore. Because every system that trains you to fear standing alone is terrified of what happens when you don't. So ask yourself, what would change if you stopped fearing solitude? What truth would you speak? What life would you live? What part of yourself would finally come alive? You've been trained to believe that loneliness is failure. But maybe it's the first step toward freedom. Maybe the real danger isn't in standing alone. Maybe it's in never standing at all. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a vast desert, and someone hands you a map. It's beautifully detailed, full of landmarks, directions, safe paths. You feel relieved, confident, even. But what if I told you that map was fake? That it was drawn to keep you walking in circles, always safe, always certain, but never free? Most people wouldn't throw that map away. They'd cling to it tighter, because most people, when pressed, will trade freedom for certainty. Freedom sounds noble. It's a word that evokes revolution, self-expression, boundless potential, but real freedom. It's terrifying. It means risk, it means responsibility. It means facing the unknown, without a script, without reassurance, without a guarantee that everything will be okay. And most people, if they're being honest, don't want that. They want something they can count on. A job, a routine, a belief system, a leader, something that removes the burden of thinking too much, doubting too often, or changing too fast. Certainty is easier. It's cleaner. It sedates the chaos. Look at politics. People don't vote for freedom. They vote for stability, for the illusion that someone else knows what they're doing, that someone has a plan. Certainty sells. It's packaged in strong slogans, rigid ideologies, and charismatic figures who promise simple answers. They don't even need to be true. They just need to feel true. Certainty quiets the anxiety that freedom amplifies. Certainty is addictive. It gives you heroes to follow and enemies to blame. It offers identity, meaning, predictability. And once you taste that predictability, it's hard to let go. Your mind starts building walls around it, defending it. Not because it's right, but because it's comfortable. And what happens to freedom? Real freedom, freedom of thought, of speech, of dissent, it gets branded as dangerous, radical, unpatriotic. Because freedom disrupts. It challenges the system. It forces people to confront ambiguity. And ambiguity is the enemy of comfort. Certainty doesn't just live in politics. It lives in religion, in science, in education. We're taught to value answers more than questions, to memorize rather than explore, to conform rather than create. The child who asks why too often becomes a nuisance. The adult who questions norms becomes a threat. Even in relationships, we crave certainty, labels, definitions, guarantees. We seek commitment not just out of love, but out of fear, fear of being alone, of the unknown, of emotional risk. We want our partners to act predictably, to meet expectations. Freedom in love sounds poetic, but in practice, it terrifies us. What if they change? What if they leave? What if they grow into someone we no longer recognize? So we trade flexibility for consistency. We trade possibility for routine. We trade the unknown for the known, even if it's unsatisfying. But here's the dark twist. The more certainty you seek, the more control you invite. Every time you say, "Tell me what to do," someone will answer, and that someone will be more than happy to shape your reality for you. Control doesn't always come with chains. Sometimes it comes with structure, rules, comfort. It looks like guidance. It feels like help, but it's a slow, quiet surrender. Every certainty you adopt without questioning is a piece of your autonomy you give away. And most people don't notice until it's too late, until their thoughts aren't really their own anymore. Because here's the real horror. Certainty isn't safety. It's submission. It's a cage made of soft pillows and soothing lies. Freedom, true freedom, is messy. It's lonely. It's painful. It's standing in the dark without a map, forging your own way, knowing you might be wrong. But it's also the only space where real growth happens, where truth lives, where meaning is made, not inherited. Though ask yourself, would you rather be free and uncertain, or certain and controlled? Most people don't want to answer that question. And maybe that's the answer in itself. Imagine you're in a group, maybe a classroom, a family, a workplace, or a nation. You're surrounded by people you care about, people whose acceptance matters. Now imagine you discover a truth, a real one, something ugly, inconvenient, or unsettling. something that could change the way people see the world, or worse, how they see you. What do? You know the answer already. You hesitate because belonging is oxygen. And truth is fire. It burns through comfort, through connection, through identity. Tell the truth, and you risk becoming an outsider. You risk exile. You risk being labeled difficult, crazy, ungrateful, or even dangerous. So instead, you swallow it. You play along. You nod, smile, blend in. Not because you don't see the lie, but because you fear what telling the truth will cost. Humans are wired for survival, and survival has never been about truth. It's been about inclusion. In the ancestral world, being cast out meant death. Alone, you starve. Alone, you're prey. So we evolved to prioritize group cohesion over personal conviction. We evolved to stay silent, even when our souls scream otherwise. This is why social harmony often trumps factual accuracy, why so many stay quiet at dinner tables, in boardrooms, in churches, in nations, why truths remain buried beneath layers of polite silence. Belonging is safety. Truth is risk. Consider the whistleblower, the one who sees the rot in the system and dares to speak up. They're rarely celebrated. They're fired, sued, doxed. They become radioactive. Why? Because they broke the unspoken contract. Protect the tribe even when it's wrong. The same is true in personal relationships. You see a friend self-destructing, a partner lying, a sibling drowning in denial. You know the truth. But you also know what saying it might do. The silence isn't because you don't care, it's because you do. You fear breaking the bond. You fear losing what little connection you have. Even our institutions are built on this dynamic. Political parties, religions, corporations, they reward loyalty, not honesty. The truth is welcomed only if it aligns with the agenda. If it doesn't, it's a threat, a virus, an act of betrayal. Ask yourself, when was the last time you told a hard truth and were rewarded for it? When was the last time you challenged a comfortable lie and felt embraced for it? Now ask, how many times have you lied, subtly, quietly, by omission, just to keep the peace? This isn't cowardice, it's instinct, it's strategy, it's the invisible price we pay for community. And it's why most belief systems, no matter how flawed, survive. Not because they are true, but because they offer identity. They offer belonging. They tell you who you are, where you fit, and who your enemies are. Rejecting them means becoming unmoored, adrift in a world where certainty vanishes and community dissolves. Belief binds us. Truth divides us. That's the paradox. So we lie. Not always overtly, not even consciously, but we adopt half-truths. We ignore contradictions. We pretend. Because the pain of exile outweighs the relief of honesty. But here's the real cost. The longer we choose belonging over truth, the more our inner world fractures. The more we betray ourselves to be accepted by others. And over time, we lose the ability to even recognize what's real. We become hollow echoes of the people we might have been. And yet, we continue. Because to tell the truth in a world that values loyalty more than integrity, to live authentically in a culture that punishes dissent, is to choose loneliness, to choose discomfort, to risk everything. Still, somewhere inside you, the truth waits. It watches, it whispers, not because it wants to destroy you, but because it wants to set you free. And one day, maybe, you'll decide the cost of silence is greater than the cost of exile. That belonging built on lies isn't belonging at all. And in that moment, when you finally speak, everything will change. You may lose the group, but you'll gain yourself. And sometimes that's the only truth that matters. Rules are meant to maintain order, or so we're told. But order for whom? And at whose expense? From the moment you're born, rules define your world. What time to sleep, what clothes to wear, what words you can say. You're taught that rules are the glue that holds society together, that without them there would be chaos. But here's the question nobody asks. Who makes the rules, and who do they truly serve? Rules don't float above us like divine commandments. They're crafted, designed, enforced by people, by institutions, by systems with power. Then more often than not, they serve the people who already have that power. Look at history. Rules once said women couldn't vote, that segregation was acceptable, that only the landowning elite deserved representation. Those weren't accidental missteps. They were deliberate architectures of control. Rules, when weaponized, become elegant cages, beautifully justified, logically airtight, and devastatingly effective at keeping people in their place. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: rules aren't made for the powerful. They're made to restrain the powerless. The powerful don't live under the same rules. They live above them. If you have enough money, enough influence, you can bend the rules, twist them, rewrite them entirely. You can break the law and walk free. You can commit atrocities and call it policy. You can rig systems and call it business. And the most disturbing part: it's all legal, because the rules were written to make it so. Meanwhile, the powerless are smothered by those same rules. If they step out of line, even slightly, the consequences are immediate and unforgiving. Minor infractions become life-altering punishments. Late fees turn into eviction notices. Petty theft becomes incarceration. Disobedience becomes criminality. Think about school. From an early age, rules are used to mold behavior. Sit still, raise your hand, don't question. But what if you're neurodivergent? What if you process the world differently? Then the rules don't protect you. They punish you. You're labeled difficult, disruptive, a problem to be solved, or consider protest. When the powerful want change, they lobby, legislate, manipulate from within. But when the powerless seek change, they march, they yell, they resist, and suddenly the rules shift. Protest becomes riot. Dissent becomes terrorism. The same act, challenging the system, is judged not by its content, but by who commits it. Even morality is subject to these rules. The powerful justify cruelty as policy. The powerless are judged immoral for fighting back. A rich man exploiting thousands is praised as a titan of industry. A poor man stealing bread is condemned as a criminal. Same society, different standards, because the rules were never about fairness. They were about control. Now, some will say rules are necessary, that without them society would collapse. But that's a false choice. The alternative to unjust rules isn't chaos. It's justice. It's creating systems that protect everyone equally, not just those who already hold the keys. But that requires questioning the rules. Not just the obvious ones, but the silent ones. The ones etched into culture, tradition, expectation. The ones that tell you to be polite when you should be angry, to be patient when you should be loud, to accept your place instead of demanding a better one. Because rules are more than laws, they're norms, scripts, psychological boundaries. They shape what you believe is possible. And the most effective rules are the ones you don't even notice, the ones you follow automatically, without resistance. Ask yourself how many of your choices are truly your own, and how many are the result of rules you've internalized, never questioned, never even seen. There's a reason revolutions begin not with violence, but with awareness, with someone saying, "Why do we follow this rule?" That question is dangerous. It's destabilizing, but it's also liberating, because once you see the rules for what they are, you can begin to reclaim your autonomy, and that's what the powerful fear most, not disobedience, but awakening. The moment the powerless realize they were never truly protected by the rules, only contained by them, the entire illusion begins to crack. So next time someone tells you to follow the rules, ask yourself who benefits from your obedience, and what would it cost you to break free? Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is simply stop playing by the rules. You're not just part of a system, you're replaceable in it. That's the point. From the first day you stepped into a classroom, into a job, into society, you were quietly being taught a terrifying lesson that your value is conditional. Conditional on performance, on compliance, on your ability to fit a mold that wasn't designed with you in mind. And if you step out of line, if you slow down, burn out, speak up, or simply want more, you'll find out how quickly you can be swapped for someone else. You're not special here, you're useful. And when you stop being useful, you disappear. Imagine a machine, massive, cold, unstoppable. Every day, people step inside, hoping to become part of something meaningful. But what they really become are cogs, interchangeable, measured not by who they are, but by what they produce. How many emails you send, how many hours you work, how few questions you ask. The machine doesn't care about your dreams. It cares about your output. If you break, it won't pause. It will replace you. And worse, it will convince you that being replaced is your fault. Think about how careers work. There's always someone younger, hungrier, cheaper, faster. Someone trained to believe they're not just better, but more obedient. So you compete. You overwork. You self-sacrifice. Not because you want to, but because you're terrified of being left behind. You feel the pressure to be irreplaceable in a system that was designed to make no one irreplaceable. Even at your best, the threat hangs over you. Subtle, persistent. You're promoted, praised, positioned like you matter until you cost too much. Until your loyalty outgrows your usefulness. Then suddenly, you're no longer seen. You're no longer needed. And just like that, you're gone. The system's brilliance is in making you feel like it's your responsibility to stay essential, like it's your job to keep proving your worth. So you take on more, you stay later, you smile harder, you ignore your body, your mind, your boundaries. Because in the back of your mind, there's always someone waiting to take your place. And that fear, that's how control works. This isn't limited to the workplace. It's in education, relationships, even activism. The moment you stop serving the narrative, you're sidelined. In school, you were told that grades would save you, that if you were smart enough, dedicated enough, you'd be different. But the system doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards conformity. You weren't learning to think. You were learning to obey. In relationships, too, you're taught that love must be earned, that your worth depends on what you offer, your time, your body, your silence. You learn to suppress your needs, to become convenient, adaptable, because you've internalized the message. Love, like labor, is conditional. Withdraw the service, lose the place. Even in movements for change, there's an unspoken hierarchy. If you become inconvenient to the cause, too radical, too honest, you're out. Replaceable, even in rebellion. Because every structure, even the ones claiming to liberate you, inherits the logic of the system it was born in. But here's the cruelest twist. You start to believe it. You begin to see yourself the way the system does. Not as a person, but as a role, a function, a label. You start to fear rest, fear silence, fear being invisible, Because you've been trained to equate stillness with failure. So you never stop. You keep performing, producing, pretending. You lose yourself in the effort to stay relevant. And when you finally collapse, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, there's no reward, no safety net, just the next person ready to take your place. That's the quiet violence of a system built on disposability. But you're not actually replaceable. Not in the way they want you to believe. You are not a function. You are not a product. You are not a role to be filled and discarded. That's the illusion, the lie. The truth is that your value isn't in your output, it's in your existence, in your uniqueness, in your resistance to being flattened into something generic. And that's what threatens the system most. Not rebellion, not revolution, but the refusal to be reduced. Because once you stop believing you're replaceable, you stop playing the game, you stop competing, you stop exhausting yourself trying to earn a place in a structure that was never built for you. And in that moment, you become dangerous, not because you're fighting the system, but because you no longer need it to define you. You're meant to feel replaceable, so you'll behave, so you'll comply, so you'll exhaust yourself trying to stay essential. But the moment you realize you never needed their permission to matter, that's when you finally become free. You're standing in a crowded room. People everywhere, laughing, talking, scrolling on their phones. At the center of the room, someone collapses, a slow, trembling fall to the floor. You notice. A few others glance over, but no one moves. No one helps, and neither do you. Not because you're cruel, not because you don't care, but because no one else is moving. And that's enough to keep you still. Welcome to the chilling truth about human behavior. People will watch you suffer if suffering becomes normal. Normalization. What does it mean for something to be normal? It doesn't mean it's right or just or fair. It means it's accepted. Routine, expected. Something the crowd no longer questions. When suffering becomes a background noise, when it's woven into the everyday fabric of life, it disappears. People don't ignore it consciously, they just stop seeing it altogether. Think of homelessness. You walk past tents, bodies huddled in corners, faces weathered by the wind. At first, it stings. It feels wrong, but day after day, the sting fades. Not because the suffering ends, but because you've adapted. You've accepted that this is how the world works. And so, like the others, you keep walking. The bystander effect, psychologists have a name for this phenomenon. The bystander effect. The more people who witness a crisis, the less likely any one person is to act. Responsibility diffuses. Action becomes someone else's job. But it's more than psychology. It's training. You're conditioned to wait for cues from others, to mirror what the group does. If no one moves, you don't move. If everyone accepts the suffering, so do you. Silence becomes safety. Inaction becomes the default. The power of repetition. And here's the trick. Normalization isn't created through logic. It's created through repetition. Show people something often enough, pain, cruelty, injustice, and it becomes background, not invisible, exactly, but accepted, expected. Think of war on the news. Think of mass shootings. Think of entire systems of exploitation. You see them, you know they're wrong, but they keep happening, again and again. Until your outrage dulls, your voice fades, and you stop expecting change. What once horrified you now barely registers. Social proof humans are social creatures. You don't just look to others for cues, you rely on them to define reality itself. If everyone around you seems okay with what's happening, you assume it must be okay. If no one else is panicking, why should you? If everyone else is stepping over the suffering, why should you be the one to stop? Social proof doesn't just shape your behavior, it shapes your morality. You come to believe what the group believes. You value what the group values, and you ignore what the group ignores. Because being different, being the one who notices, who speaks, who acts, is dangerous. It threatens your place in the tribe, and somewhere deep in your mind, belonging still means survival. The system is built on this. This isn't just a quirk of psychology, it's a feature of the system. The world works better for those in power when you become numb, when injustice becomes normal. The powerful are free to maintain it. When exploitation becomes expected, the exploited stop fighting back, and so suffering is hidden in plain sight. It's dressed in routine, masked by bureaucracy, buried in headlines. You're shown just enough to get used to it, but never enough to feel empowered to change it. You're told it's complicated. You're told it's someone else's problem. You're told to be calm, patient, rational. You're told that outrage is unhelpful. You're taught to watch, but not to intervene. Historical echoes history is full of these moments. Genocides, famines, systemic oppression. They didn't happen in secret. People saw, people knew, but they had learned not to see, not to care, not to act. Because by then, the horror had already become the norm. And once something becomes the norm, the conscience collapses under the weight of collective silence. And so suffering becomes scenery, a backdrop to daily life, a footnote to the main event, the moral cost. But here's the price you pay. Every time you look away, it becomes easier to look away next time. Every time you justify inaction, you lose a piece of your ability to act. Your morality erodes, not through evil choices, but through endless tiny surrenders, until one day you no longer recognize the moment when you stopped being someone who would have helped. And that's the most terrifying part. Not that people will watch you suffer, but that they'll do so thinking they're good, thinking they care, thinking they're helpless. When in truth, they've simply been trained to believe that suffering is normal and therefore unchangeable. But it's not. And that truth, if you let it in, is as powerful as it is uncomfortable. Imagine a man standing at the edge of a golden opportunity. He has the connections, the charisma, and just enough competence to make it big. But there's a catch. To cross that final threshold, to secure the deal, win the promotion, dominate the market, he needs to look the other way, just once. Just long enough to let something unfair, unethical, or outright harmful slip through unchallenged. And he does, not because he's evil, but because that's how the world rewards success. Not with honor, but with plausible deniability. Success often requires moral blindness, not in theory, but in practice. Not in grand, villainous acts, but in small, silent omissions. Think about the workplace. High performers aren't always the most ethical, they're the most adaptable. The ones who can nod politely through a discriminatory joke in a boardroom, who can cut a corner if it pleases a client, who can let a lie go uncorrected if the lie is profitable. It's not that they don't see the problem, it's that seeing it, really seeing it, would make action inevitable. And action comes with consequences. Moral vision comes with a price. And in the world of success, price matters more than principle. You've seen it before, maybe in your own life. A manager promotes someone who plays politics better than they perform. A company celebrates record profits while quietly slashing benefits. An influencer preaches authenticity while masking every insecurity behind a filter. The more visibly successful someone becomes, the more blind spots they must cultivate. Not because they don't care, but because success demands it. because seeing too much is dangerous. To climb higher, you have to ignore the bodies beneath you, the underpaid labor, the emotional toll, the exploited trust, and most importantly, your own discomfort. That quiet, persistent voice in your head that whispers, "This isn't right." But the world doesn't reward that voice. It punishes it. That voice gets you labeled difficult, ungrateful, unprofessional. It gets you passed over, pushed aside, or politely silenced. So most people learn, slowly and quietly, to turn it down. Not off, just enough to function. We call this being realistic, strategic, pragmatic. But really, it's a form of moral anesthesia, a numbness to the cost of winning. Look at history. The titans of industry, the political giants, the icons of innovation. How many succeeded without stepping on someone, without suppressing inconvenient truths, without denying the suffering their actions caused? The world doesn't just tolerate moral blindness, it expects it. It builds systems that demand it. Because moral clarity is disruptive. It slows things down. It forces hard questions. It makes profit uncomfortable. And discomfort is bad for business. Now ask yourself, would you rather be right or successful? It's a question most people pretend they'll never have to answer. But they do. In the meetings they attend, in the silence they keep, in the compromises they accept as normal. You might think, not me, I'd never cross that line. But that's the trick. The line isn't drawn all at once. It appears gradually in the form of choices so small, so reasonable, that you barely notice them. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you haven't just looked away from the truth. You've adapted to it. You've succeeded. Yes. But you've also lost something. And what makes this even more disturbing? Most people who reach the top aren't sociopaths. They're not cartoon villains. They're ordinary people who made enough small compromises to stop noticing the weight of them, who justified one decision at a time until their conscience fell out of the equation entirely. They didn't kill their morality. They just put it in storage. And the world clapped for them. Because success isn't just about achievement. It's about alignment with power, with influence, with comfort, and morality. Real morality. It doesn't align. It disrupts. So the next time you admire someone's success, ask yourself, what didn't they see to get there? What truth did they overlook? What price did they accept on someone else's behalf? And then ask yourself, would you have done the same? Because in this world, success isn't blind by accident. It's blind by design. You wake up every morning, believing you know who you are. You remember your name, your preferences, your values. You think these things came from within you, your family, your culture, your choices. But what if they didn't? What if your identity, the very idea of who you are, has been carefully manufactured, not to free you, but to sell you back to yourself? Think about it. From the moment you were born, you were surrounded by signals, colors, toys, clothes, all coded by gender, status, and market potential. You were nudged, prodded, shaped into a consumer long before you could even speak. By the time you knew what you liked, someone else had already predicted it. Not because they knew you, but because they built you. Preferences are not pure. They are engineered. What you find stylish, what you crave, what you dream of becoming. These aren't spontaneous truths of the self. They're data points. Forecasted desires. You don't buy the clothes you like the clothes that were sold to you through invisible algorithms and aspirational propaganda. You've been curated. And here's the sinister part. You're not resisting it, you're performing it. You decorate your identity like a storefront. Carefully arranged opinions, stylized aesthetics, consumable quirks. Not because they define you, but because they signal who you want to be seen as. And every signal is a transaction. You present yourself to the world, and in return, you receive approval, attention, maybe even influence. It feels like expression, but it's just commerce dressed in authenticity. Instagram knows your face. Spotify knows your mood. Amazon knows your weakness. TikTok knows your loneliness. Every swipe, every pause, every click, data fed into a system designed to understand you better than you understand yourself. Not to heal you, not to free you, but to market you back to yourself. You think you're choosing. You're not. You're being chosen for. And when you do feel lost, when your identity starts to slip, when things feel hollow and uncertain, the system is ready. It offers you a product, a brand, a lifestyle. Who am I? Becomes what should I buy? Self-discovery turns into a shopping spree. Aesthetic becomes therapy. Consumer choice replaces existential meaning. You stop being a person and become a persona. You think you're building yourself, but you're assembling a mask, and the mask must be maintained. Polished, updated. You start to fear falling behind. The trends change faster than you can adapt, and suddenly your identity is obsolete. So you rush, you rebrand, you hustle for relevance. But it never ends, because the system isn't offering you wholeness, it's offering you perpetual inadequacy. That's how it works. If you felt complete, you wouldn't need to consume. If you felt seen, you wouldn't need to perform. So the system makes sure you never quite arrive. Just close enough to chase, but never close enough to rest. Even rebellion has been monetized. You think you're resisting the mainstream by choosing the alternative, the edgy, the underground. But that too is a market. That too is a brand. Your rage, your irony, your darkness. It all has a SKU number. Your defiance is being sold in bulk. You can dye your hair, pierce your face, quote Nietzsche, or scream into the void. But if the algorithm can predict it, it can package it. And if it can package it, it can sell it to you, through you. Your identity is no longer something you discover. It's something you subscribe to. So ask yourself, when you say, "This is who I am," whose voice are you echoing? Is it your parents, your peers, the influencers you follow, the brands you wear, the platforms you trust? Or is it something quieter, deeper, something that doesn't fit neatly into a demographic box? You won't find that answer in a comment section or a product catalog. You won't unlock it with a purchase or a performance. You'll find it in silence, in solitude, in the moments when you stop trying to be anything at all. Because the truth is disturbing, but freeing. Your identity was built to be sold back to you. But you don't have to keep buying. You've heard the phrase, silence speaks volumes. But what if silence isn't just communication? What if it's protection? Your last line of defense. Imagine a child in a volatile home. A slammed door means danger. Raised voices mean threat. That child learns quickly. Stay quiet, stay small, stay unnoticed. Words can trigger rage, questions can provoke violence. So they become experts in silence. Not because they have nothing to say, but because speaking can be deadly. That instinct doesn't vanish in adulthood. It matures, it evolves. Silence becomes more than survival. It becomes strategy. In toxic workplaces, silence keeps you employed. You see favoritism, exploitation, incompetence. You grit your teeth, you smile, you nod. Because speaking up would mean risking the only thing keeping your life from unraveling. The paycheck, the reputation, the fragile social ecosystem where rocking the boat gets you thrown overboard. So you hold your tongue, not out of cowardice, but calculation. In authoritarian regimes, silence is the only safe language. Ask the wrong question, post the wrong comment, support the wrong cause, and you disappear. Sometimes literally. Families learn to speak in codes. Friends censor themselves mid-sentence. Neighbors glance over shoulders before whispering what they really think. Here, silence isn't avoidance, it's armor. Even in relationships, silence is survival. You know the kind when your partner's love feels conditional, where your honesty always seems to backfire. You stop sharing dreams, fears, truths. Not because they don't matter, but because revealing them means exposure, vulnerability, another wound. So you go quiet, you curate yourself into a version that's easier to love, or at least less likely to be punished. And here's the most disturbing part. Society rewards you for this silence. It applauds your restraint, calls it maturity, labels it professionalism, praises your ability to let things go. But it's not peacekeeping, it's self-preservation. You're not being passive, you're being tactical, because speaking the truth in a world that punishes truth is an act of war. Consider whistleblowers. They tell the truth and are destroyed. Careers ruined, lives shattered. Friends vanish. The system doesn't thank them. It eradicates them. The lesson is clear. Stay quiet. Stay safe. And so the vast machinery of corruption, abuse, and injustice keeps humming, fueled by the silence of those too wise to speak. Think of social media. One wrong post, and your life can implode. Not always for hate speech or violence, but for nuance, for context, for daring to question the dominant narrative. The mob doesn't want dialogue, it wants obedience. So you learn to scroll, to watch, to absorb, but not to speak. Not unless your words are perfectly aligned, perfectly sanitized. And in your own mind, silence becomes your defense against yourself. You don't think about what hurts. You don't examine what's broken. You mute the internal alarms screaming for change. Because the truth threatens the structures you've built. Your relationships, your identity, your sense of control. It's easier to silence the self than to confront the chaos. But let's be clear, this silence isn't weakness. It's adaptation, a high-functioning defense mechanism, honed by centuries of oppression, trauma, and survival. In a dangerous world, silence becomes intelligence. It's how the marginalized stay alive. How the powerless keep their dignity, how the oppressed endure. You might think you're just quiet, just private, just conflict avoidant. But look deeper. That silence is a map, charting where you've been hurt, betrayed, ignored. Every word you don't say has a story. Every silence is a scar. And yet, even in this protective quiet, something dangerous happens. You begin to disappear. Not to others, but to yourself. Your truth, once buried long enough, starts to decay. Your identity becomes whatever version of you is safest. Your silence begins to shrink you. So you're stuck in a paradox. Silence keeps you safe, but also keeps you small. It preserves your life, but starves your soul. And the longer you stay silent, the harder it becomes to remember what your voice even sounded like before the world taught you to swallow it. This is why silence is often a survival strategy, but never a destination. It can save you, but it cannot heal you. To survive, you may have needed to go quiet. To live, at some point, you'll need to speak. Even if your voice trembles, even if the world doesn't listen. Because silence may shield you from harm, but it also shields the systems that cause it. And there will come a moment, a breaking point, where your silence starts costing more than it protects. That's when you'll know the risk of speaking has become worth it. Until then, if you're silent, let it be strategic, let it be chosen. But don't mistake silence for peace. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice, and justice begins the moment someone dares to speak. Have you ever laughed at someone, only to feel oddly unsettled afterward, not because they didn't deserve it, but because deep down, part of you recognized something familiar, something threatening, something you wish you had? We mock what we secretly envy. And that's not just a poetic idea. It's a psychological defense mechanism, a way to disguise longing as disdain. Think about the class clown, the one who doesn't follow rules, who disrupts order, who somehow always draws attention. Most people scoff, to call them immature, desperate, annoying. But part of us watches, fascinated, because that person is free in a way we aren't. They speak when we stay silent. They disobey when we conform. And in mocking them, we hide the truth. We wish we could be them. Envy wears many masks, but mockery is its favorite. This isn't just about humor. It's about control. Mocking what we envy gives us distance. It lets us say, I'm better than that, even when we know we're not. Or worse, especially when we know we're not. When we feel powerless to achieve what they have, we downgrade it instead. You see someone confident, unapologetically themselves, and you roll your eyes. What a show-off, you say. But what you're really thinking is, I wish I could be that bold. Rather than admit that, your ego builds a wall of mockery, sarcasm, dismissal, not because you hate them, but because you're afraid you'll never be them. We do this all the time, with beauty, with success, with wealth, with freedom. We laugh at influencers, criticize artists, sneer at entrepreneurs. But behind every scoff is a mirror we refuse to look into. Mockery is safer than admiration. It asks less of us. Admiration forces vulnerability. It admits we lack something, that we want something, that we're not complete. But mockery, it flips the script, makes the other person the fool, turns their power into our punchline. And the more we mock, the deeper we bury the truth. This doesn't mean everyone we mock deserves admiration. Some people are truly ridiculous. But ask yourself, why do certain people get under your skin more than others? Why does their confidence feel like an insult? Why does their success feel like a threat? Because you've convinced yourself that what they have is impossible for you. So instead of trying, you attack. But here's where it gets darker. The more we mock, the more we reinforce our own prison. Every time we laugh at someone for doing what we're afraid to do, be vulnerable, take risks, speak out, we tighten our chains. We make rebellion feel ridiculous. We make freedom feel foolish. We train ourselves to believe that playing it safe is smarter, more adult, more realistic. That's how society polices itself. Not through law or force, but through ridicule. Through the subtle art of shaming the dreamers. We mock artists who haven't made it. We mock spiritual people for being naive. We mock activists for being too idealistic. But underneath the laughter is fear. Fear that we gave up too soon, that we settled, that they're living proof of the path we never took. So instead of changing ourselves, we try to break them. It's easier that way, but mockery doesn't kill envy. It only hides it. And envy, denied, becomes poison. It festers. It mutates into resentment. You start to hate what you once admired, not because it changed, but because you refused to. And that hatred becomes a cage. A bitter, lonely cage, where nothing is good enough and no one is worth following. Eventually, you stop mocking others and start mocking yourself. You internalize the contempt. You convince yourself that your dreams were stupid, that your hopes were childish, that your real self was always a joke. This is how the world breaks people, not with violence, but with shame. So next time you feel the impulse to mock someone, pause, ask yourself, what am I really feeling? Is it disgust? Or is it jealousy? Do I think they're ridiculous? Or do I wish I had their courage? You might be surprised by the answer, and that answer, if you let it, might show you the path you've been avoiding. Because the things we mock often point to the life we secretly want, the version of ourselves we buried under layers of judgment, but it's still there, waiting. And the first step to finding it again: stop laughing, start listening. Imagine you're presented with two answers. One is complex, nuanced, layered with caveats and conditional truths. The other is simple, clean, black and white. One feels like work, the other feels like clarity. Now here's the disturbing part. Your brain will almost always pick the simple one, even when it's wrong. Simplicity feels like safety, certainty, a lighthouse in the storm of confusion. And that's exactly why it wins. Not because it's right, but because it's easy. Your brain is constantly starved for efficiency. It craves shortcuts, patterns, heuristics. You don't solve every problem from scratch. You default to the easiest answer that fits. That's why cliches, stereotypes, and slogans hold so much power. They bypass thought. They speak in absolutes. They give your mind the illusion of resolution. Think of politics. The most effective campaigns aren't the most accurate. They're the ones with the catchiest lines. Build the wall. Yes, we can. Make America great again. These aren't arguments. They're mantras. Memes. Symbols of psychological relief, masquerading as policy. Now think about justice, morality, ethics. These are complicated, messy. They demand patience and self-reflection. But what wins? Sound bites, tweets, outrage clips that compress complexity into bite-sized rage. Because simplicity feels like truth, even when it's just noise. Even science, perhaps the last bastion of rigor, isn't immune. Pop science dominates, because real science is slow, cautious, tentative. Sugar causes cancer, spreads faster than sugar may contribute to certain cancer risks under specific conditions. One sounds urgent, the other sounds unsure. This isn't just a communication problem, it's an existential one. When simple answers dominate, we stop thinking. We start reacting. The world becomes flat. Nuance dies. Take the myth of meritocracy, the idea that success is based purely on hard work and talent. It's simple, elegant. It feels fair, but it's wrong. It ignores inherited wealth, systemic bias, and structural inequality. Still, people believe it. Not because the evidence supports it, but because the alternative is too uncomfortable to unpack. Simplicity is seductive. It offers certainty where there is ambiguity, control where there is chaos. But beneath it lies a darker truth. Simplicity isn't neutral. It's a weapon. Bad actors know this. Propagandists, extremists, manipulators. They don't argue with facts. They package lies as clean, digestible truths. They're stealing your jobs. It's all a hoax. They hate your freedom, manufactured and weaponized, and we fall for it. Over and over again. Because the truth, it's exhausting. It demands doubt, effort, tension. Truth forces you to sit with uncertainty, to admit you don't know, to hold multiple possibilities in your head at once. That's not just intellectually hard, it's emotionally painful. So we take the shortcut. We cling to the illusion. We choose the story that feels good over the one that's actually true. But here's the most unsettling part. This isn't just about politics or society. It's personal. We lie to ourselves in the same way. We choose simple narratives about who we are, what we want, why we fail. I'm just lazy. They're just evil. It's not my fault. We don't ask deeper questions because we're afraid of the answers. Complexity threatens the story we tell about ourselves. And that story, it's what keeps us sane. But sanity built on lies is fragile. It cracks under pressure. That's why simplicity wins, not because it enlightens, but because it protects. And in a world increasingly optimized for speed, for volume, for mass consumption, the truth becomes a casualty of comfort. So the next time something feels obvious, immediate, absolute, ask yourself, is it true or is it just simple? Are you thinking or are you outsourcing your thought to the easiest answer available? Because simplicity is easy. Simplicity is powerful. Simplicity is dangerous. And in the battle between what's easy and what's real, easy almost always wins. You're walking through life, minding your own business, convinced you've done nothing wrong. No crimes, no lies, no betrayal. Just an ordinary person trying to live an ordinary life. But what if I told you that guilt doesn't need your actions? What if guilt isn't earned, but assigned? Imagine a courtroom where you're the defendant. There's no accusation, no evidence, no witness, just a vague discomfort in the air, a lingering suspicion, a sense that something about you, your silence, your neutrality, your passivity, is enough. And then comes the verdict guilty. Not for what you did, but for what you didn't do, for what you allowed. Moral systems, social hierarchies, ideological machines, they all have a way of painting absence as presence, of turning inaction into complicity. You didn't stop the injustice. You didn't speak when others were silenced. You didn't pull the lever, but you watched. And in the eyes of the world, that's sometimes worse. You don't have to raise a fist to be guilty. Sometimes, all it takes is keeping your hands in your pockets. There's a psychological trap here. A trap so insidious that most people never see it until it's too late. It's called moral proximity. The idea that the closer you are to a wrongdoing, the more culpable you become, regardless of what you did. You saw it. You knew. You had a choice. And even if you froze, even if you hesitated out of fear or confusion or powerlessness, the outcome remains the same. The thing happened and you didn't stop it. Now imagine you're in a workplace. Your colleague is being bullied. You hear it, see it, feel the tension crackling in the air. But you don't want to get involved. You're not the bully, you're just there. And that's enough. Because silence protects the abuser. Neutrality is not neutral when injustice is unfolding in front of you. It's a shield, just not for the right person. This is the moral distortion. No one wants to admit that goodness is not the absence of evil, but the presence of courage. And when courage is missing, guilt seeps in, quietly, invisibly. History is littered with examples of this. Entire societies standing by while horrors unfolded, neighbors turning away, citizens obeying, staying silent, telling themselves it wasn't their place, their fault, their problem. But in the aftermath, the world asks, how could so many have done nothing? The answer is always the same. Because doing nothing feels safe. It feels clean. But guilt doesn't care about your feelings. It lives in what you failed to do. And this isn't just about massive atrocities or historical tragedies. It happens every day in micro moments. You see a lie spread and don't correct it. You notice unfair treatment and say nothing. You scroll past suffering and call it not your business. You don't do harm, but you don't prevent it either. And deep down, you know that matters. Here's the unbearable part. Guilt without action haunts longer than guilt from doing wrong. Because at least with active guilt, you know why it exists. You can face it, name it, try to fix it. But passive guilt, it lingers in the shadows. It's harder to explain, to justify. It feels like a weight without shape, an ache without a wound. Because doing nothing is still a decision. still a posture, still a message. And the system counts on that. It thrives when good people stay quiet, when decency is passive, when morality is polite. That's the paradox. You don't have to be malicious to be responsible. You just have to be present, aware, and silent. So ask yourself, where have you been silent? What have you allowed simply by staying out of the way? Who has suffered while you waited for someone braver to step forward? Because guilt is no longer reserved for the wicked. In a world this broken, it stains the indifferent too. Obedience is a strange thing. At first, it feels like safety, like order, like doing the right thing. You grow up learning to listen, to follow rules, to trust authority. And each time you obey, whether it's a parent, a teacher, or a stranger in a uniform, you get praised. You're called good, responsible, respectful. You're rewarded not just with approval, but with identity. You're told you're a good person because you follow the rules. But what if that's the trick? What if obedience isn't virtue at all, but conditioning? Imagine this: a man in a lab coat tells you to shock someone. You hear screams from behind a wall. Each time the dial turns up, more voltage, more pain. And every time you hesitate, the man reassures you. It's necessary, he says. You must continue. You're nervous, but you obey. You're not cruel, you're just following instructions. This isn't fiction. This was the Milgram experiment. And most people, just like you, went all the way, not because they were evil, but because they thought obedience made them moral. That's the horror. Obedience mimics morality. It wears its clothes, it uses its language, but it's hollow. It doesn't ask you to think, only to follow. It doesn't want conscience, it wants compliance. And when you obey, you feel safe, clean, untouched by the consequences. You didn't make the choice, you just carried it out. You tell yourself, I was just doing my job. I was just following orders, and that right there is how the worst things in history happen. Not because of monsters, but because of good, obedient people. You see, the world doesn't need you to be cruel to do cruel things. It just needs you to comply, to stay silent, to nod, to sign, to look away. Obedience becomes a shield, not from harm, but from guilt. And over time, you stop asking if the rules make sense. You stop questioning if the orders are right. You confuse discipline with virtue, submission with goodness. But here's the terrifying part. Society is built to reinforce that confusion. From the time you're a child, you're told to sit still, don't talk back, respect authority. You're trained not to think critically, but to respond obediently. And the more obedient you are, the more you're celebrated. The straight-A student. Obedient, the model employee. Obedient, the ideal citizen. Obedient, virtue, you're told, is following the script. And so when a system becomes corrupt, when authority becomes unjust, you're unequipped to respond. You've been conditioned to believe that disobedience is dangerous. That questioning is immoral. That breaking the rules, even when they're wrong, makes you bad. So you stay quiet. You obey. And deep down, it still feels like virtue. Because disobedience is uncomfortable. It's uncertain. It forces you to rely on your own judgment. And that's terrifying. It's much easier to believe someone else knows best, that the rules exist for a reason, that it's not your job to decide what's right, only to follow. But obedience is never neutral. It either upholds justice or enables injustice. And the line between the two is rarely marked in bold. Most of the time, it's subtle. A small lie at work, a silent witness in the face of cruelty, a form you sign without reading, a policy you enforce without question. Tiny acts, each one easy to justify, each one praised as responsible, each one obedient, and each one carries a cost, because every act of obedience, when unexamined, has the potential to serve something dark, something dishonest, something dangerous. And the worst part, you'll feel proud of yourself for doing it. Because obedience doesn't just feel like virtue, it hijacks your moral compass. It replaces inner conviction with external approval. It teaches you to equate goodness with compliance, conscience with conformity. But real virtue, true moral courage, looks very different. It questions, it resists. It chooses not to follow when following causes harm, and often it's punished. Because obedience keeps the machine running, disobedience threatens to break it. So the next time you're praised for being a good follower, pause, ask yourself, who benefits from your obedience? What are you upholding, and what might happen if you stopped? Because virtue isn't about doing what you're told, it's about knowing when not to. You're not punished for being unaware, you're rewarded. That might sound backwards, like ignorance should carry consequences. But in this world, ignorance is incentivized. Act like everything's fine, and people leave you alone. Ask too many questions, and suddenly you're the problem. You're difficult, paranoid, negative. Why? Because awareness threatens the script. It disrupts the rhythm of a society that only functions when most people are asleep with their eyes open. You get rewarded for staying unaware in 1,000 small ways. At work, the unaware employee is praised for being easygoing, agreeable, non-confrontational. They don't ask why the workload keeps increasing, but the pay stays the same. They don't question the mission, the metrics, the meaningless meetings. They smile, they nod, they comply. Stability, approval, the illusion of safety. Meanwhile, the one who questions the system gets labeled a liability. Even if they're right, especially if they're right, the system doesn't like awareness. Awareness spreads, it's contagious. It makes others uncomfortable. And nothing kills efficiency faster than discomfort. So you're trained, gradually, to stop noticing, to filter out the noise, to numb yourself to contradictions. That's not just survival, it's strategy. In relationships, ignorance plays a similar role, for overlooking the lies, for pretending that everything's fine. As long as you don't rock the boat, the relationship endures, even if it's slowly killing you. Speak up too much, and suddenly you're too sensitive, too demanding, too intense. Stay unaware, and you're easy to love. Do you see the pattern? Unawareness becomes a kind of social lubricant. It keeps things smooth, tolerable, palatable. But there's a cost, your integrity. Every time you choose unawareness, you betray yourself just a little bit more. The media rewards unawareness too. It feeds you entertainment, outrage, distraction, anything to keep you from noticing what really matters. As long as you're scrolling, you're not organizing. As long as you're entertained, you're not resisting. You're rewarded with dopamine, comfort, community, all for staying quiet. Because the moment you start noticing, you become dangerous. You start seeing how justice isn't a principle, it's a transaction. How comfort isn't liberation, it's sedation. How your exhaustion isn't random, it's engineered. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. But the most powerful form of unawareness, it's not external, it's internal. You lie to yourself, and the world rewards you for it. You tell yourself your job matters, even though it drains you. You say your partner loves you, even though you feel unseen. You insist you're happy, even as something inside you quietly crumbles. Why? Because facing the truth is destabilizing. It forces change. It threatens everything you've built around the lie. So the world makes it easy, comfortable, even to lie to yourself. It reinforces the lie with money, praise, and superficial peace. But here's the paradox. The longer you stay unaware, the more hollow everything becomes. You wake up one day and realize you've built your life on a foundation of sand. All the rewards you collected for your unawareness, they vanish when you need them most, because the system that rewards ignorance doesn't care about you. It only cares about your usefulness, and the second you burn out, wake up, or ask for more, it casts you aside. So ask yourself, are the rewards worth the cost? Because there's another kind of reward, one the system can't give you, the kind that comes from awareness, real awareness. It's harder, lonelier, but it's also honest, and in that honesty there's power. The power to see clearly, to choose differently, to live authentically. You're rewarded for staying unaware, but you're transformed when you finally wake up. Imagine a child standing alone in front of the class, eyes wide, hands trembling, as the teacher asks a question they don't know the answer to. The silence thickens. Then laughter, not just from classmates, but a smile from the teacher too. A grin masked as motivation. That moment burns in their brain, and something changes. From then on, they avoid the spotlight. They stay quiet. They don't raise their hand. Not because they're stupid, but because they've learned the lesson that really mattered. Shame is control. Shame teaches you obedience before you even know what obedience means. It punishes visibility. It conditions you to self-monitor, to shrink, to hide your flaws before anyone else can expose them. And once that lesson lands, it doesn't leave. It becomes a reflex, a survival instinct, a leash. This isn't accidental. Shame is built into the foundations of how societies function. It polices behavior without requiring laws. It enforces norms without the need for violence. The beauty of shame as a tool of mass control is that it doesn't need guards or prisons. It turns your own mind into the warden. Religious institutions understood this early. The idea of sin, of moral failure, has always been enforced not just through rules, but through shame. Shame for your thoughts, shame for your desires, shame for your body. By embedding guilt into your identity, religion didn't need to surveil you constantly. You'd do it yourself. You'd confess. You'd repent. You'd conform. Now look at modern culture. It may seem secular, progressive, even liberated, but shame didn't disappear. It evolved. Today, it's aesthetic, social, digital. You're shamed for your appearance, your success, your failure, your opinions. Every aspect of your identity becomes a potential source of embarrassment. Shame's reach is now total. Social media amplifies it exponentially. Algorithms thrive on outrage. Viral shame spreads faster than any plague. One mistake, one misstep, and your life can be reduced to a meme, mocked, dissected, and permanently etched into public memory. You're not just punished, you're humiliated. Not corrected, but erased. But why does it work so well? Because humans are social creatures. Your sense of identity is rooted in how others see you. Shame hijacks that mechanism. It makes you terrified of exclusion, of being cast out of the tribe. And so you conform, not because you believe, but because you're afraid. Afraid of being laughed at, afraid of being labeled, afraid of being alone. This is where shame becomes indistinguishable from power. It turns culture into a surveillance machine. It ensures the majority regulate themselves while punishing the outliers. Deviance becomes dangerous, not because it's wrong, but because it's visible. And visibility, under the regime of shame, is vulnerability. The truly chilling part is how early it begins. Children are praised when they conform and shamed when they deviate. Crying too much, Shame acting out. Shame asking too many questions. Shame by adulthood. The lesson is fully absorbed. Fit in or pay the price. The system doesn't have to threaten you. It just has to make you ashamed. And so people stay quiet. They lie about who they are. They contort themselves to fit in, swallowing dissent, muting their pain, silencing their instincts. Not because they lack courage, but because shame has taught them that survival depends on invisibility. Governments understand this too. The most effective censorship isn't bans, it's stigma. Label a belief as fringe, radical, dangerous, and watch people abandon it, not out of disagreement, but out of fear. Not of punishment, but of humiliation. When shame is deployed politically, it delegitimizes without debate, and corporations, they've mastered shame for profit. They sell you beauty products by first convincing you you're ugly. They sell you self-help books by convincing you you're broken. Every ad whispers the same message: you are not enough, but you could be if you just bought this. It works because the wound is already there. Shame has already cracked you open. All they do is exploit the opening. But here's the paradox. The more ashamed people feel, the more obedient they become, and the more alienated they feel from their own selves. Shame doesn't just regulate behavior, it fractures identity. It makes you mistrust your instincts, doubt your worth, internalize your subjugation. And that is the final triumph of shame as mass control. It doesn't just change what you do, it changes who you are. So the question becomes, how do you escape? You don't resist shame by pretending it doesn't affect you. You resist it by seeing it, by recognizing it for what it is, not a moral compass but a mechanism of control. You reclaim power by refusing to be humiliated by your humanity, by remembering that imperfection isn't shameful, it's inevitable, because shame only controls you as long as you believe it defines you. The moment you realize it was never yours to carry, that it was placed on you, shaped for you, taught to you, you begin to become dangerous. Not because you're shameless, but because you're free. You walk into a room and someone offers you two doors. Behind the first, safety, predictability, comfort. A world where nothing ever really goes wrong, and even if it does, someone else takes care of it. Behind the second, freedom, real freedom. But with it comes risk, uncertainty, responsibility, and danger. Most people don't hesitate. They reach for the first door without even asking what it costs. Because safety feels good. Freedom feels terrifying. We like to pretend we're a species of wild, untamable individuals. But deep down, most people would rather be safe than free. Safety is warm. Safety is familiar. Safety is the absence of fear. And freedom. Freedom is fear incarnate. The unknown. The unpredictable. The place where no one comes to save you if you fall. When a crisis hits, war, disease, economic collapse, people don't cry out for liberty. They beg for protection, for rules, for surveillance, for someone to tell them what to do. And the terrifying truth, they'll trade almost anything for it. Their privacy, their autonomy, even their integrity, because freedom means accountability. If you're free, you have no one to blame, no excuses. And that's a heavy burden. But safety means someone else is responsible. Someone else holds the reins. You just follow. Think of the systems built around this trade. Governments promise security in exchange for compliance. Corporations promise convenience in exchange for your data. Religions promise salvation in exchange for obedience. They all understand the same thing. The average person fears uncertainty more than they crave truth. That's why people will work jobs they hate for decades, because it's safe. They'll stay in relationships that drain them. because they're familiar. They'll nod along to beliefs they don't fully understand, because challenging them feels dangerous. Freedom means facing life raw, no scripts, no guarantees, and most people aren't ready for that. The trick is, we don't even recognize the trade anymore. We've been conditioned to think of safety as virtue, the responsible choice, the adult path, but behind that comfort is a system that feeds on your fear, carefully wrapping control in the language of protection. It's subtle. You're not chained, you're cushioned, you're not surveilled, you're protected. You're not silenced, you're guided. And the more comfortable you become, the less likely you are to revolt. The more dependent you are on the system, the more you fear losing it. This is how freedom dies, not with violence, but with gratitude, with relief. When people ask for curfews, when they cheer for censorship, when they thank their captors for keeping them safe, we're told freedom is sacred, but that's only true in the abstract. In practice, we cling to comfort, even if it means giving away everything that makes us free, because freedom is dangerous. Freedom makes you uncomfortable. It forces you to question, to fail, to take risks, and safety. Safety just asks you to stay quiet. So you start to wonder how much of what you do each day is truly your choice. How many of your beliefs, your habits, your routines were shaped by a system designed to keep you comfortable and obedient? Would you still do what you do if you weren't afraid? Would you still think what you think if safety weren't the reward? Most people never find out, because they never ask. They never open the second door. But if you're listening, if something in you stirs at the thought of being free, know this: freedom costs more than safety, always has, always will. But it's the only thing worth paying for.